People conform more when everyone else agrees. When every voice in a room aligns, something subtle but powerful happens inside the human mind. Doubt begins to feel dangerous. Agreement starts to feel safe. Even when people sense that the group may be wrong, the pressure of unanimity can override personal judgment. This is not weakness, it is wiring. Humans evolved to survive in groups, and for most of our history, standing apart from the group meant isolation, danger, or death. Agreement once meant protection, belonging, and survival. When everyone else agrees, the brain interprets consensus as evidence. Silence from dissent feels louder than disagreement itself. The mind begins to question its own perception, asking whether it has missed something obvious. This creates an internal conflict where fitting in feels more urgent than being right. The fear is rarely conscious, but it is deeply emotional. The fear of exclusion, of being judged, of being alone. Unanimity also creates the illusion of certainty. When no alternative opinions are present, ideas feel stronger, cleaner, and more correct than they truly are. People mistake confidence for truth, repetition for accuracy, and numbers for wisdom. The group becomes a mirror reflecting back a single reality, and the individual slowly adjusts themselves to fit that reflection. This is why people agree with decisions they privately doubt, laugh at jokes they do not find funny, and support beliefs they once questioned. The cost of disagreement feels higher than the cost of surrendering one's opinion. The emotional reward of acceptance outweighs the discomfort of self-betrayal. In social environments, unanimity becomes a silent force of control. It shapes behavior without commands, influences choices without arguments, and changes minds without ever needing persuasion. The most powerful pressure is not force or authority, but the feeling that everyone else is already on the same side. We copy the gestures of those we like. When we feel drawn to someone, our body responds before our conscious mind does. Without thinking, we begin to mirror their posture, movements, and gestures. A lean forward is matched, a hand movement is echoed, a relaxed stance is quietly adopted. This is not deliberate imitation. It is the body's instinctive way of signaling connection and alignment. Liking someone creates a desire for psychological closeness, and the body translates that desire into motion. Humans are wired to seek similarity because similarity has always meant safety and belonging. When we mirror another person's gestures, we unconsciously communicate familiarity and trust. It tells the other person on a deeply emotional level that they are understood and accepted. This process is driven by mirror neurons in the brain, which activate when we observe the actions of people we feel connected to. These neurons allow us to internally simulate what others are doing and feeling, blurring the boundary between self and other. As a result, interactions feel smoother, more natural, and emotionally rewarding. Conversation flows more easily because the body is already in sync. Mirroring also reinforces attraction. Seeing one's own movements reflected back creates comfort and validation, even if it goes unnoticed. The interaction begins to feel safe, familiar, and effortless. Over time, this mutual synchronization deepens bonds without words or intention. This is why close friends develop shared mannerisms, why romantic partners begin moving alike, and why admiration shows up physically before it is ever expressed verbally. Long before someone says they like another person, their body has already revealed the truth through quiet, unconscious imitation. Smiling increases perceived trust. A smile is one of the fastest ways the human brain decides whether someone is safe or threatening. Before words are processed, before logic has time to intervene, the brain scans facial expressions for emotional intent. A genuine smile signals warmth, openness, and non-aggression, instantly lowering psychological defenses. It tells others, "I mean no harm," and that message is received almost automatically. from an evolutionary perspective, showing relaxed facial muscles and exposed teeth without aggression indicated peace. This made smiling a powerful social shortcut for trust. When someone smiles, the observer's nervous system relaxes, heart rate slows slightly, tension eases, and the interaction feels less risky. Trust begins not because of evidence, but because of emotion. Smiling also triggers emotional contagion. When we see a smile, our brain is more likely to activate the same muscles, even subtly. This shared expression creates a feedback loop where both people begin to feel more positive and connected. The interaction shifts from guarded to cooperative without either person consciously deciding to trust. In social and professional settings, smiling increases likability, approachability, and perceived honesty. People are more willing to listen, agree, and engage when they feel emotionally safe. A smiling face is interpreted as confident yet friendly, assertive yet non-threatening. Even brief smiles can soften first impressions and influence long-term perceptions. However, the power of a smile lies in authenticity. Forced or mismatched smiles create discomfort and suspicion. When the eyes do not align with the expression, the brain senses inconsistency. A genuine smile, even a subtle one, communicates sincerity in a way words cannot. This is why smiling opens doors, disarms tension, and builds trust. Before trust is ever consciously given, the face speaks first, and the smile is its most convincing argument. Help increases when responsibility feels personal. People are far more likely to step in and help when they feel that the responsibility belongs specifically to them. When a situation feels shared, the mind looks outward, waiting for someone else to act. But the moment responsibility becomes personal, hesitation collapses into action. The question shifts from someone should help to I should help, and that internal shift changes everything. This response is rooted in how humans manage moral pressure. Personal responsibility activates guilt, empathy, and self-identity all at once. Ignoring a need when you feel personally accountable threatens the way you see yourself. The mind begins to imagine the emotional cost of doing nothing, regret, shame, and self-blame. Helping becomes a way to preserve one's sense of being a good, capable person. When responsibility is vague, the emotional weight is diluted. In groups, people unconsciously distribute blame, assuming someone more qualified or more confident will step in. This diffusion creates emotional distance, making inaction feel acceptable. But when a person is singled out, addressed directly, or clearly positioned as the one who can help, that emotional distance disappears. Personal responsibility also creates urgency. It removes the safety of anonymity and replaces it with visibility. Being seen as the one who failed to act carries a stronger emotional consequence than the inconvenience of helping. The brain chooses action as the lesser psychological cost. This is why direct requests work, why eye contact increases assistance, and why people help more when their role is clear. When responsibility feels personal, helping is no longer optional. It becomes an emotional necessity driven by identity, empathy, and the need to stay aligned with who we believe we are. Rejection triggers pain centers in the brain. Rejection is not just emotionally painful. The brain processes it as a form of physical pain. When someone is excluded, ignored, or dismissed, the same neural regions that respond to bodily injury become active. The brain does not sharply distinguish between a broken bond and a broken bone. To it, social loss signals danger. This response exists because for most of human history, rejection meant vulnerability. Being cast out of a group reduced access to protection, resources, and survival itself. As a result, the brain evolved to treat social exclusion as a serious threat. Pain became the alarm system, designed to force reconnection. What feels like heartbreak, embarrassment, or shame is actually the nervous system demanding repair. Rejection attacks more than mood. It threatens identity. Humans define themselves through belonging. When acceptance is withdrawn, the mind scrambles to understand what went wrong. Thoughts loop, memories replay, and self-worth is questioned. This mental rumination intensifies the pain, making rejection linger far longer than the moment itself. The body responds as well. Stress hormones rise, sleep is disrupted, and emotional regulation weakens. People may become withdrawn, desperate for approval, or unexpectedly aggressive. These reactions are not flaws in character, but survival responses to perceived social injury. Even subtle rejection, like being ignored or excluded from a conversation, can activate this pain system. The brain reacts before logic can intervene, which is why rejection can hurt even when we know it shouldn't. Understanding this explains why humans fear exclusion so deeply and why acceptance feels so powerful. Social pain is real pain, and the brain treats it as something that must not be ignored. Being watched boosts generosity. The moment people sense that they are being observed, their behavior subtly changes. Generosity increases not because the person suddenly becomes more selfless, but because being watched activates a powerful concern for reputation. Humans are deeply social beings, and how we are perceived by others carries emotional weight. When eyes are on us, generosity becomes a signal of character. This reaction is rooted in survival and status. For most of human history, social standing determined access to protection, resources, and belonging. Being seen as generous meant being valued by the group. When we feel observed, the brain shifts into impression management mode, prioritizing behaviors that earn approval and respect. Giving becomes a way to communicate trustworthiness without words. Being watched also intensifies self-awareness. People become more conscious of their actions and how those actions might be judged. This heightened awareness makes selfish behavior feel risky. The emotional cost of appearing greedy or uncaring outweighs the cost of sharing. As a result, generosity feels safer than self-interest. Even subtle cues of observation can trigger this effect. A pair of eyes on a poster, a camera in the corner, or the presence of strangers can increase giving. The brain does not require certainty of judgment, only the possibility of it. The idea of being evaluated is enough to shape behavior. Generosity under observation is not fake kindness, it is social instinct. Humans are wired to act in ways that protect their social image. When watched, giving reinforces identity, strengthens reputation, and signals alignment with group values. This is why people donate more publicly, act kinder in crowds, and behave more morally when visibility is high. Being watched turns generosity into a form of social currency, exchanged for acceptance, trust, and belonging. Groups form even over trivial differences. Humans do not need meaningful reasons to divide themselves into groups. Even the smallest, most arbitrary differences are enough to trigger a sense of us and them. A random label, a color, a preference, or an assigned category can instantly create belonging on one side and distance on the other. The mind latches on to these differences and treats them as significant, even when logic says they are meaningless. This behavior comes from an ancient survival instinct. For most of human history, knowing who belonged to your group meant knowing who would protect you, share resources, and stand with you in moments of danger. The brain evolved to categorize quickly, favoring speed over accuracy. Once a boundary is drawn, even a weak one, loyalty begins to form almost automatically. Belonging to a group provides emotional safety. It gives identity, validation, and a sense of being part of something larger than oneself. The moment a person identifies with a group, their self-esteem becomes partially tied to that group's status. Protecting the group starts to feel like protecting the self. At the same time, outsiders are subtly dehumanized, not through hatred at first, but through emotional distance. What makes this especially powerful is how invisible it feels. People genuinely believe their group preference is rational or earned, even when it was created by chance. Once formed, group identity shapes opinions, judgments, and behavior. People favor their own group in trust, generosity, and forgiveness, while holding others to harsher standards. This is why rivalries emerge over nothing, why loyalty can form overnight, and why division feels natural even when it makes no sense. The human mind is not searching for difference because difference matters, but because belonging does. Eye contact builds connection, but can cause discomfort. Eye contact is one of the most intense forms of human connection. When two people lock eyes, the brain interprets it as attention, presence, and attention. It signals that someone is fully engaged, emotionally available, and aware of you. This is why eye contact can instantly deepen conversations and make interactions feel more meaningful. At the same time, eye contact is psychologically exposing. Being seen activates self-awareness, and self-awareness can quickly turn into vulnerability. The longer eye contact is held, the more emotionally naked a person may feel. The brain begins to ask unspoken questions. What do they see in me? How am I being judged? Am I safe here? This internal dialogue can trigger discomfort, especially when trust has not yet been established. Eye contact also increases emotional intensity. It amplifies whatever is present in the interaction. Warmth feels warmer, attraction feels stronger, and tension feels heavier. For some, this heightened intensity is bonding. For others, it becomes overwhelming. Cultural norms, personality, and past experiences all shape how much eye contact feels acceptable before it crosses into intrusion. From a neurological perspective, eye contact activates social and emotional processing systems in the brain. It demands attention and creates a moment of mutual awareness that is hard to ignore. This is why avoiding eye contact can feel like emotional withdrawal, while too much can feel like pressure. Eye contact is powerful because it removes distance. It says, I see you, but it also asks, can you handle being seen? When used with sensitivity, it builds trust and closeness. When forced or prolonged without emotional safety, it can trigger unease. The same gaze that connects can also overwhelm, depending on timing, intent, and context. Confidence often persuades more than accuracy. When people speak with confidence, the brain is quick to assume they know what they are talking about. Tone, posture, and certainty are processed faster than facts, and confidence acts as a shortcut for credibility. Long before listeners evaluate whether something is true, they decide whether the speaker feels convincing. In that gap, confidence wins. This happens because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Humans are drawn to people who project certainty because certainty promises safety and direction. A confident voice reduces cognitive effort. It removes doubt and replaces it with clarity, even when that clarity is false. The brain prefers a firm answer over a correct but hesitant one because decisiveness feels reassuring. Confidence also triggers authority bias. When someone appears sure of themselves, they are subconsciously placed higher in the social hierarchy. Higher status individuals are assumed to have better information, experience, or insight. As a result, their words carry more weight, regardless of factual accuracy. The listener's guard lowers and agreement becomes easier. Accuracy, on the other hand, often requires nuance, hesitation, and complexity. These signals can be misinterpreted as weakness or uncertainty. Even truthful statements lose persuasive power when delivered without conviction. The emotional impact fades and the message feels less compelling. This is why bold claims spread faster than careful explanations, and why confident misinformation can outperform quiet truth. People respond to how something is said more than to what is said. Confidence creates momentum, and momentum pulls others along. In social dynamics, persuasion is rarely about facts alone. It is about emotional certainty. When someone sounds like they believe themselves completely, others feel invited to believe them too, even when accuracy quietly takes a back seat. Laughter happens more in groups. Laughter is rarely just a response to humor. In social settings, it becomes a signal of connection, safety, and belonging. When people are in groups, laughter increases not because everything is funnier, but because laughter serves a social purpose. It communicates acceptance, shared understanding, and emotional alignment with others around us. From an evolutionary standpoint, laughter functioned as a bonding mechanism. It signaled to the group that there was no immediate threat and that cooperation could continue. Hearing others laugh tells the nervous system it is safe to relax. This is why laughter spreads so easily in groups. One person's laughter gives permission for others to join, creating a chain reaction that reinforces unity. In groups, laughter also acts as social glue. People laugh to show agreement, to ease tension, and to signal that they are part of the collective. Even unfunny comments can trigger laughter when the goal is connection rather than amusement. The emotional reward of fitting in often outweighs the need for genuine humor. Laughter also reduces social risk. It softens interactions, masks uncertainty, and fills uncomfortable silence. In group dynamics, laughing together lowers barriers and creates a shared emotional experience that strengthens bonds quickly. It turns strangers into allies and acquaintances into companions. This is why people laugh more with others than alone, why canned laughter influences perception, and why shared laughter makes moments feel memorable. Laughter is not just an expression of joy, it is a social tool. In groups, it becomes a language of belonging, signaling, without words, that you are safe here and you are not alone. People overestimate how visible their mistakes are. When people make a mistake, it often feels as if a spotlight has been turned on them. The mind assumes everyone noticed, judged, and remembered it. In reality, most people are far less aware than we imagine. This distortion happens because we experience our own actions from the inside, where emotions, embarrassment, and self-criticism are amplified. This effect is driven by self-focus. When something goes wrong, attention collapses inward. The brain becomes hyper-aware of the error, replaying it repeatedly in an attempt to regain control and avoid future embarrassment. Because the mistake feels loud internally, the mind assumes it must be equally loud externally, but others are usually preoccupied with their own thoughts, insecurities, and concerns. Social anxiety strengthens this illusion. The fear of being judged convinces the brain that others are constantly evaluating us. A small stumble, awkward pause, or verbal slip feels like a defining moment, even though it barely registers for anyone else. What feels like a lasting failure is often forgotten by observers within seconds. This overestimation also serves a protective function. By exaggerating the visibility of mistakes, the brain attempts to push us toward caution and social conformity. It is a survival mechanism meant to reduce future risk, not an accurate assessment of reality. Understanding this gap between perception and reality can be freeing. The intense discomfort after a mistake is real, but the imagined audience is largely fictional. Most people are not watching as closely as we think. The mind magnifies errors to keep us safe, but in doing so, it traps us in unnecessary fear. What feels unforgettable to us is usually invisible to everyone else. Any reason increases compliance. When people are given a reason for a request, their resistance drops almost instantly. The reason itself does not need to be strong, logical, or even meaningful. What matters is that a reason exists. The presence of an explanation signals order and intention, and the human mind is comforted by that structure. This happens because the brain is trained to respond to cause and effect. A request without a reason feels abrupt and intrusive, triggering skepticism or defensiveness. Add a reason, and the request suddenly feels justified. The mind shifts from questioning whether it should comply to simply processing what was said. Compliance becomes automatic rather than deliberate. Emotionally, reasons reduce uncertainty. They make people feel respected, included, and less controlled. Even weak reasons give the illusion of choice and understanding, which lowers psychological resistance. The request no longer feels like a demand, but a socially acceptable exchange. This effect also relies on mental shortcuts. In everyday life, people cannot analyze every request deeply, so they rely on cues. Because is one of the strongest cues of legitimacy. Hearing it triggers a learned response. Reasons usually make sense, so the brain assumes this one does too. That assumption is powerful. People comply not because they agree, but because the situation feels normal and justified. The emotional discomfort of refusal feels greater than the effort of compliance. This is why simple explanations work in persuasion, why authority figures give reasons even when unnecessary, and why people say yes more often when they understand why they are being asked. The mind does not demand a good reason. It only demands a reason at all. Norms often override personal beliefs. In social settings, what feels acceptable often matters more than what feels true. Even deeply held personal beliefs can weaken when they collide with powerful social norms. The human brain is constantly scanning the environment for cues about what is allowed, expected, and safe. When a norm is clear, violating it triggers discomfort long before any moral reasoning takes place. This happens because social norms are tied to belonging. Agreeing with the group protects social standing, while defying it risks rejection, embarrassment, or isolation. The emotional weight of those risks can outweigh the importance of personal values in the moment. People may privately disagree, yet publicly comply, choosing connection over conviction. Norms also create psychological shortcuts. When everyone behaves a certain way, the brain assumes that behavior must be correct or justified. Questioning it requires effort, confidence, and a willingness to stand alone. Most people choose the emotional ease of alignment rather than the tension of resistance. Over time, repeated compliance can blur internal boundaries. What begins as surface-level conformity can slowly reshape beliefs themselves. The mind adapts to reduce inner conflict, convincing itself that the norm makes sense after all. This is how environments quietly shape values, not through force, but through repetition and emotional pressure. This influence is strongest when norms are reinforced by authority, visibility, or reward. Applause, approval, and inclusion act as signals that obedience is safer than authenticity. In these moments, norms do not just guide behavior, they rewrite it. This is why good people follow bad rules, why silence feels easier than dissent, and why cultures can drift without anyone choosing the direction. Social norms do not need to convince you. They only need to make disagreement feel too costly. Scarcity increases cooperation. When resources feel limited, human behavior shifts in powerful and predictable ways. Scarcity sharpens attention and heightens awareness of others. In these moments, cooperation becomes a survival strategy rather than a moral choice. When people sense that there may not be enough to go around, working together feels safer than acting alone. This response is deeply rooted in human evolution. In harsh environments, individuals who coordinated, shared, and protected one another were more likely to survive. Scarcity taught the brain that unity increases odds. As a result, limited resources trigger social bonding, mutual reliance, and collective problem solving. The group becomes a shield against uncertainty. Scarcity also clarifies priorities. When abundance disappears, distractions fade, and social roles become more defined. People become more attuned to fairness, reciprocity, and trust because betrayal carries higher costs. cooperation is no longer abstract. It directly affects outcomes. Helping others increases the likelihood of being helped in return. Emotionally, scarcity creates a shared sense of threat. Shared threat reduces social distance. Differences that matter in times of comfort often fade when survival feels at stake. People who might otherwise compete begin to align because isolation feels more dangerous than compromise. However, scarcity must feel shared to increase cooperation. When resources are perceived as unfairly controlled or hoarded, cooperation collapses into conflict. But when scarcity is experienced collectively, it activates solidarity rather than selfishness. This is why crises often bring people together. In moments of limitation, humans rediscover interdependence. Scarcity strips away illusion of self-sufficiency and reminds the brain of an old truth. Survival has always been easier together than alone. Speech patterns are unconsciously mirrored. When people feel comfortable, interested, or emotionally aligned with someone, their speech begins to shift without awareness. Tone, pace, volume, word choice, and even sentence structure slowly start to match. This is not imitation for effect. It is synchronization, driven by connection. The voice adapts before the mind notices it has changed. Mirroring speech patterns is the brain's way of reducing social distance. Similar speech creates familiarity, and familiarity feels safe. When two people sound alike, interactions feel smoother and more cooperative. The conversation requires less effort because both speakers are operating on the same emotional frequency. The brain interprets this alignment as mutual understanding. This process is guided by the same mirror neuron system that drives physical mirroring. Hearing how someone speaks activates internal simulations of their rhythm and emotional state. Over time, the listener unconsciously adopts those patterns, signaling empathy and agreement. The result is a subtle feedback loop where connection reinforces similarity and similarity deepens connection. Speech mirroring also increases trust and persuasion. People feel more comfortable around those who sound like them, even if they cannot explain why. Matching pace can calm tense conversations, while matching enthusiasm can amplify excitement. When speech patterns align, resistance drops and openness increases. This is why close friends develop shared expressions, why partners begin finishing each other's sentences, and why accents soften or shift depending on who we are around. The voice becomes a social instrument, tuning itself to the people we want to connect with. Long before agreement is spoken, the way we speak has already adapted. Our words may differ, but our rhythm reveals alignment. Touch can increase trust and compliance. Physical touch bypasses logic and speaks directly to the nervous system. A brief, appropriate touch on the arm or shoulder can instantly change how safe, connected, and receptive someone feels. Before the mind evaluates intent, the body reacts. Muscles relax, tension drops, and emotional barriers soften. Trust begins as a physical sensation long before it becomes a conscious judgment. Touch activates biological bonding mechanisms. It stimulates the release of oxytocin, a hormone closely linked to trust, attachment, and social bonding. This chemical response creates warmth and familiarity, even between strangers. When someone feels physically grounded and emotionally at ease, resistance lowers and openness increases. Compliance follows, not because of pressure, but because the interaction feels safe. In social contexts, touch signals reassurance and presence. It communicates attention in a way words cannot. A light touch can make someone feel seen, supported, and valued, triggering a desire to reciprocate. That reciprocity often shows up as agreement, cooperation, or willingness to help. This effect is subtle but powerful. When used naturally, touch strengthens rapport and deepens connection. When used strategically, it can influence decisions without ever appearing forceful. People are more likely to say yes to requests from those who have established physical warmth, even if they cannot explain why. However, context determines everything. Touch that feels unexpected, invasive, or misaligned with the relationship triggers discomfort instead of trust. The brain immediately shifts into defense. For touch to build trust, it must feel appropriate, respectful, and emotionally congruent. This is why a simple gesture can open doors, soften negotiations, and strengthen bonds. Touch does not persuade through argument. It persuades by making people feel safe enough to agree. Groups intensify opinions. When people enter groups, their opinions rarely stay the same. Instead of averaging out, beliefs tend to grow stronger, sharper, and more extreme. What begins as a mild preference can evolve into firm conviction simply through discussion and shared agreement. The group does not soften views, it amplifies them. This happens because groups create emotional reinforcement. Hearing others echo similar thoughts validates internal beliefs and reduces doubt. Each nod, agreement, or supportive comment acts as psychological fuel, pushing opinions further in the same direction. The brain interprets consensus as confirmation, and confidence grows faster than caution. Groups also shift the emotional tone of thinking. Individuals feel safer expressing stronger views when they are surrounded by allies. The fear of judgment decreases, allowing opinions to stretch beyond what would be said alone. What once felt risky to voice now feels encouraged, even rewarded. Social identity plays a powerful role. When an opinion becomes tied to group membership, changing that opinion feels like betraying the group itself. Beliefs turn into symbols of loyalty. The stronger the group bond, the harder it becomes to question shared ideas. Dissent starts to feel like rejection, so people push further into agreement rather than pull back into uncertainty. Emotionally charged language spreads quickly in groups, intensifying reactions and narrowing perspective. Nuance fades as clarity and certainty take its place. The group rewards conviction, not hesitation. This is why crowds become more passionate, debates become polarized, and decisions become riskier in groups. The collective mind feeds on itself, strengthening whatever direction it is already moving. Alone, people question. Together, they commit. Similarity increases trust. When people recognize something familiar in another person, trust begins to form almost instantly. Shared traits, beliefs, experiences, or even small preferences signal alignment. The brain reads similarity as predictability, and predictability feels safe. If someone seems like you, they feel easier to understand and less likely to cause harm. This response is deeply rooted in survival. For most of human history, those who looked, acted, or believed similarly were more likely to belong to the same group. Familiarity meant cooperation, shared values, and mutual protection. The mind still carries this ancient logic, quickly assigning trust to those who resemble us in some way. Similarity reduces uncertainty. When people share common ground, the brain fills in gaps with positive assumptions. Intentions are judged more generously, mistakes are forgiven more easily, and ambiguity feels less threatening. The emotional barrier that usually guards trust lowers without conscious permission. This effect extends beyond major similarities. Even trivial commonalities, such as liking the same music or using the same phrases, can create a sense of connection. These small overlaps act as social shortcuts, accelerating trust before evidence has time to accumulate. Similarity also strengthens emotional comfort. Being around someone who feels familiar allows people to relax and be themselves. This openness further reinforces trust, creating a loop where comfort breeds honesty, and honesty deepens trust. This is why friendships often form quickly around shared interests, why people trust those who reflect their values, and why feeling understood matters more than being impressed. Trust does not begin with proof. It begins with the feeling of recognition. Higher status gets more attention. Human attention is not distributed equally. It is drawn upward toward those perceived as higher in status. In any group, eyes instinctively shift to the person with authority, confidence, or social power. Before a word is spoken, the brain has already decided who matters most. Attention follows status because status once signaled survival value. From an evolutionary perspective, high-status individuals controlled resources, protection, and direction. Paying attention to them increased the chances of safety and success. That wiring still operates today. The brain treats status as a shortcut for importance, assuming that those at the top have information worth hearing and cues worth following. Status also shapes perception. When a high-status person speaks, their words feel heavier, more credible, and more meaningful. The same statement, delivered by someone lower in status, may be ignored or questioned. This creates a feedback loop where attention reinforces authority, and authority attracts even more attention. Emotion plays a key role in this process. Being noticed by someone high in status feels rewarding, while being ignored by them feels unsettling. People adjust their behavior, posture, and speech to align with those they see as superior, often without realizing it. Approval from higher status figures carries emotional weight because it signals acceptance within the social hierarchy. This dynamic explains why leaders dominate conversations, why confident individuals are listened to more, and why social influence often has little to do with expertise. Attention is not earned solely through knowledge, but through perceived rank. Once attention gathers at the top, it becomes self-sustaining. Status draws focus. Focus amplifies influence, and influence solidifies status. Long before people decide who they agree with, they have already decided who is worth watching. Anonymity increases aggression. When people feel anonymous, the emotional brakes that normally regulate behavior begin to loosen. Without a clear identity attached to their actions, the fear of judgment, punishment, or social consequence fades. This psychological distance creates space for impulses that would otherwise remain suppressed. Anonymity weakens accountability. When no one knows who you are, your actions feel disconnected from your reputation and self-image. The mind separates behavior from identity, making it easier to act in ways that contradict personal values. Aggression becomes less risky because the social cost feels low or non-existent. There is also a powerful emotional shift. Anonymity reduces self-awareness and increases focus on immediate feelings, frustration, anger, or resentment that might normally be filtered through empathy and restraint can surface unchecked. The absence of eye contact, names, or personal connection strips interactions of humanizing cues, making others feel less real. This effect is amplified in group settings where responsibility is shared. Individuals feel hidden within the crowd, allowing aggression to feel justified or even encouraged. Emotional contagion spreads quickly, and hostile behavior escalates as people mirror one another without fear of standing out. From an evolutionary perspective, visibility kept aggression in check. Being seen meant being remembered. Anonymity removes that pressure. It creates a sense of psychological invisibility that frees people to act on darker impulses. This is why online spaces, mass crowds, and faceless interactions often feel harsher than face-to-face encounters. When identity dissolves, empathy weakens. Without the weight of being known, aggression finds room to grow. Compliments linger longer than criticism. When someone receives a compliment, it embeds itself deeply into memory, often resurfacing long after the moment has passed. The words replay in the mind, not because they were loud, but because they touched identity. Compliments speak to how a person sees themselves or wants to be seen, and that makes them emotionally sticky. This happens because positive social feedback activates the brain's reward system. Compliments release dopamine, creating a feeling of validation and belonging. The brain marks the moment as important, storing it with greater clarity and emotional weight. Criticism, while painful, is often processed defensively and dismissed as a threat, but compliments feel safe enough to be absorbed. Emotionally, compliments reduce self-doubt. They offer reassurance that one's efforts, traits, or values are recognized by others. This validation becomes a reference point during moments of insecurity. People replay compliments to stabilize their self-image when confidence wavers. Compliments also stand out because they are rarer than criticism. The mind is conditioned to expect judgment, so sincere praise feels unexpected and meaningful. When someone notices something good and names it, it signals attention and care, which deepens its impact. Criticism often fades because the mind protects itself by minimizing or rationalizing it. Compliments, however, are welcomed. They are revisited, shared internally, and quietly carried forward. This is why a single genuine compliment can outweigh many negative remarks, influence long-term motivation, and strengthen bonds. Words that affirm do not simply pass through. They stay, echoing long after they are spoken. Similar people help each other more. Help flows more easily between people who feel alike. When someone shares our background, values, appearance, or experiences, the brain categorizes them as part of us. That single shift changes emotional distance. Their problems feel closer, more personal, and more urgent, even when the situation is identical to that of a stranger. Similarity triggers empathy. Seeing ourselves in another person activates emotional resonance, making their struggle easier to imagine and harder to ignore. Helping them feels less like a sacrifice and more like protecting a part of ourselves. The boundary between self and others softens, and compassion follows naturally. This response is rooted in survival instincts. For most of human history, helping those similar to us increased the chances that help would be returned. Familiarity meant shared norms, predictable behavior, and mutual loyalty. The brain still uses similarity as a shortcut for trustworthiness, even in modern settings where it may no longer be rational. Similarity also reduces psychological risk, helping someone like us feel safer because we expect gratitude, understanding, and fairness in return. With dissimilar others, uncertainty creeps in and hesitation grows. The mind weighs potential costs more heavily when emotional connection is weak. This bias operates quietly. People often believe their help is driven by fairness or kindness, unaware of how strongly similarity shapes their choices. From friendships to workplaces to entire societies, assistance follows invisible lines of resemblance. This is why communities form quickly, why favoritism feels natural, and why inequality can persist without intent. Helping is not just about need, it is about recognition. The more someone feels like us, the more their pain demands our attention and our action. Social bonds reduce stress. Strong social connections act as a buffer between the mind and stress. When people feel supported, understood, and emotionally connected, the nervous system responds differently to pressure. Challenges that feel overwhelming in isolation become more manageable when shared. The brain interprets connection as safety, and safety calms the stress response. This effect is deeply biological. Social bonding triggers the release of oxytocin, a hormone that counteracts stress hormones like cortisol. As oxytocin rises, heart rate slows, anxiety decreases, and the body shifts out of survival mode. Simply being around trusted people can signal to the brain that danger has passed, even if the external problem remains. Emotional support also changes how stress is perceived. When someone listens, validates, or empathizes, the mind feels less alone with its burden. Stress loses its intensity when it is witnessed by another person. Feeling understood reduces the need for constant vigilance and self-protection. Social bonds also encourage healthier coping behaviors. People are more likely to rest, reflect, and regulate emotions when they feel connected. In contrast, isolation amplifies stress by forcing the brain to handle threat alone. Loneliness keeps the nervous system alert, scanning for danger that may never arrive. From an evolutionary standpoint, connection meant survival. Humans evolved to rely on groups for protection and resources. That ancient wiring remains. The brain still equates closeness with safety. This is why even brief moments of genuine connection can bring relief. A conversation, a shared laugh, or silent companionship can lower stress without changing circumstances. The body relaxes not because the problem is gone, but because it no longer feels faced alone. Authority can override morals. When an authority figure gives an order, moral judgment can quietly step aside. People who see themselves as kind, ethical, and principled may still carry out actions that conflict with their values if those actions are framed as instructions from someone in power. The shift is subtle, but profound. Responsibility feels transferred upward, and personal accountability begins to fade. This happens because authority creates psychological permission. From an early age, humans are trained to obey figures of power to maintain order and avoid punishment. Over time, obedience becomes automatic. When authority speaks, the brain prioritizes compliance over conscience, interpreting obedience as the safer emotional choice. Authority also restructures how people interpret harm. Actions feel less like personal decisions and more like tasks. Moral weight is diluted by hierarchy. The individual no longer feels like the source of the action, only the instrument. This emotional distancing makes it easier to proceed without fully confronting the consequences. Fear plays a quiet role as well. Disobeying authority risks rejection, conflict, or loss of status. These threats feel immediate and personal, while the moral cost feels abstract and distant. The mind chooses the path that reduces immediate emotional discomfort. Authority figures often project confidence and certainty, which further suppresses doubt. When someone in power appears sure, questioning them feels unnecessary or even wrong. The presence of authority simplifies complex moral decisions into simple obedience. This is why ordinary people can commit extraordinary harm under orders, and why systems matter as much as individuals. Authority does not erase morality, but it can overpower it by redirecting responsibility and numbing emotional resistance. Faces influence judgment more than words. Before a single word is processed, the human brain has already formed an opinion. Faces are read instantly, automatically, and emotionally. Expressions, eye movement, muscle tension, and symmetry are analyzed in fractions of a second, shaping trust, likability, and credibility long before logic enters the conversation. What someone says often matters less than how their face makes others feel. This happens because faces once carried life or death information. A tense jaw could signal aggression, relaxed features suggested safety, and eye contact indicated intention. The brain evolved to prioritize facial cues because they offered faster, more reliable signals than language ever could. Words can be controlled, but faces are harder to fake. Facial expressions trigger emotional responses that color interpretation. A calm, open face makes statements seem more reasonable and honest. A tense or cold expression can make even truthful words feel suspicious. The brain does not evaluate words in isolation. It filters them through the emotional signal the face provides. This is why first impressions are so powerful and so stubborn. Once the face sets a tone, the mind looks for confirmation. Words that align with the initial impression are accepted easily, while contradictory information is questioned or dismissed. Judgment becomes biased not by evidence, but by emotional resonance. Faces also create emotional contagion. Subtle expressions influence how others feel in return, shaping the entire interaction. A warm face invites openness. A guarded one invites distance. This is why charisma often outperforms logic, why appearances sway decisions, and why people trust faces before facts. Long before words make their case, the face has already delivered its verdict. Shared experiences bond more than traits. People feel closer to others not because they are similar on paper, but because they have lived something together. Shared experiences create emotional memory, and emotional memory is far stronger than shared preferences, backgrounds, or personality traits. What bonds people is not who they are, but what they have endured, enjoyed, or survived side by side. Experiences activate emotion, and emotion is what the brain uses to mark importance. When people go through moments together, their nervous systems synchronize. Fear, excitement, stress, or joy felt at the same time creates a sense of we. The brain links those emotions to the presence of the other person, making the bond feel real and lasting. Traits feel abstract, but experiences feel personal. Two people can share values and interests and still feel distant, while strangers can feel deeply connected after a meaningful shared moment. The mind trusts those who have been present during emotionally charged situations because they are associated with vulnerability and authenticity. Shared experiences also create stories, and stories anchor relationships. Recalling a moment relived together reinforces closeness each time it is remembered. These memories become proof of connection, something tangible the brain can return to when assessing trust and belonging. This is why friendships form quickly during intense events, why co-workers bond during high-pressure projects, and why relationships deepen after shared hardship or adventure. Experiences collapse distance. They turn individuals into witnesses of each other's inner states. Connection is built through moments, not checklists. What truly binds people is not similarity, but the emotional imprint of time spent feeling something together. Silence is often misread as awkward. Silence triggers discomfort, not because it is inherently negative, but because the human brain is wired to interpret it as uncertainty. In social situations, people expect a steady exchange of signals that confirm connection, interest, and safety. When those signals stop, the mind rushes to fill the gap, often with anxiety rather than calm. This reaction is driven by fear of social evaluation. Silence creates space where people worry about how they are being perceived. Thoughts spiral toward questions of judgment, rejection, or failure. The absence of sound feels like the absence of approval, even when nothing is actually wrong. Emotionally, silence feels risky because it removes feedback. Modern social norms reinforce this discomfort. Conversation is often treated as proof of chemistry and competence. When words pause, people assume something has gone wrong. The silence is interpreted as tension, boredom, or disapproval rather than rest or reflection. The brain prefers noise over ambiguity. Silence also removes control. Speaking allows people to steer interactions and manage impressions. Silence takes that control away, forcing individuals to sit with their own thoughts. For many, that exposure feels unsettling, so they rush to fill the gap, even with meaningless words. Ironically, silence can signal comfort and trust. Close relationships often contain long pauses that feel safe rather than strained. But in unfamiliar or evaluative settings, the brain defaults to threat interpretation. This is why people laugh nervously, over-explain, or interrupt silence prematurely. The discomfort is not caused by silence itself, but by the stories the mind tells in its absence. Peers influence more than experts. People are more likely to be shaped by those they see as equals than by those with authority or expertise. When advice comes from a peer, it feels relatable, achievable, and emotionally safe. The brain responds not to credentials, but to closeness. If they are like me and chose this, the mind thinks, then I probably should too. Peers reduce psychological distance. Experts can feel intimidating or disconnected. triggering comparison, self-doubt, or resistance. Peers, on the other hand, feel familiar. Their choices feel like realistic options rather than abstract ideals. Influence works best when it feels attainable, not superior. This effect is driven by social proof. Humans look to similar others to understand how to behave, especially in uncertain situations. When peers act, their behavior becomes a guide for what is normal, acceptable, and safe. The brain assumes that people like us have already done the emotional risk assessment. Emotional trust also plays a role. Peers are perceived as having less to gain from influencing us. Their advice feels genuine rather than strategic. Experts may be correct, but peers feel honest. That emotional authenticity carries weight. Peer influence is strongest when identity is involved. People align their beliefs, habits, and decisions with their social circle to protect belonging. Disagreeing with an expert is easy. Disagreeing with friends risks connection. This is why trends spread horizontally, not top-down, why habits form through social circles, and why expertise alone rarely changes behavior. Influence follows similarity. People don't change because someone knows more. They change because someone like them already has. Exclusion increases later conformity. Being excluded leaves a psychological mark that doesn't fade when the moment ends. After rejection, the brain shifts into repair mode, becoming hyper-aware of social rules and expectations. The need to belong intensifies, and with it comes a stronger drive to fit in. Conformity becomes a way to reduce the risk of being excluded again. Exclusion triggers social pain, and pain motivates behavior change. The mind begins scanning for cues about what is acceptable, what is rewarded, and what must be avoided. Behaviors that once felt optional now feel necessary. Agreeing, blending in, and suppressing differences become emotional safeguards against further rejection. This response is rooted in survival. For most of human history, exclusion meant danger. The brain learned to treat it as a warning signal. After being pushed out, people unconsciously adjust themselves to become more acceptable to the group. Individual expression shrinks while group alignment grows. Emotionally, exclusion creates self-doubt. People question their value, their judgments, and their instincts. In that vulnerable state, external opinions carry more weight than internal ones. The group's behavior becomes a guidebook for how to be allowed back in. This heightened conformity is not about losing identity. It is about protecting it. The fear of repeated rejection is stronger than the desire to stand out. Even subtle exclusion can produce this effect, shaping future behavior long after the initial experience. Exclusion teaches the brain a painful lesson. Belonging feels fragile. To secure it, people learn to adapt, agree, and disappear into the group when necessary. The drive to conform is not weakness, but the mind's attempt to prevent social pain from happening again. Behavior shifts with social context. People do not carry a single fixed version of themselves into every situation. Instead, behavior subtly reshapes itself depending on who is present, where they are, and what is expected. The same person can be confident in one setting and reserved in another, compassionate in one group and detached in the next. This is not inconsistency. It is social adaptation. Humans are wired to read environments for cues about safety, status, and belonging. The brain constantly asks, often unconsciously, what behavior will be accepted or rewarded here. Once that answer feels clear, actions adjust automatically. Tone changes, posture shifts, and values are emphasized or muted to fit the moment. Social context also defines roles. In one setting, a person may feel powerful and expressive. In another, they may feel small and cautious. These roles shape behavior more strongly than personality. The emotional drive to belong and avoid rejection pushes people to align with the expectations of the group they are in. This adaptability once ensured survival. Fitting in meant protection, while standing out meant risk. That ancient logic still operates today. When context changes, the brain updates its strategy, prioritizing harmony over authenticity if necessary. Behavioral shifts are often invisible to the person experiencing them. They feel natural, justified, and correct in the moment. Only later, when contexts collide, do contradictions become apparent. This is why people act differently at work than with friends, why crowds change behavior, and why moral choices shift under pressure. Social context does not just influence behavior. It quietly rewrites it, moment by moment, to keep the individual emotionally safe within the group. Self-disclosure invites self-disclosure. When someone reveals something personal, it creates an invisible opening. The moment vulnerability is shared, the emotional tone of the interaction shifts. Barriers lower, formality fades, and the other person feels an unspoken pull to respond in kind. Silence suddenly feels distant, while openness feels appropriate. This happens because self-disclosure signals trust. By sharing personal thoughts, emotions, or experiences, a person communicates that the interaction is safe enough to risk being seen. The brain interprets this as an invitation, not a demand. Reciprocity activates, and withholding begins to feel emotionally unbalanced. Self-disclosure also creates connection through vulnerability. Hearing someone open up triggers empathy and identification. The listener feels chosen, included, and valued. That emotional reward makes sharing back feel natural. It restores equilibrium and deepens the bond. There is also a subtle pressure at work. When one person exposes something real, the other risks appearing guarded or insincere by staying surface level. Matching vulnerability becomes a way to maintain trust and social harmony. The exchange becomes a quiet agreement. We are on the same emotional level. This dynamic is why deep conversations accelerate intimacy, why friendships form quickly after personal sharing, and why trust builds faster when vulnerability comes first. But the effect depends on pacing. Oversharing too early can overwhelm rather than invite. When done with balance, self-disclosure unlocks emotional reciprocity. One honest reveal becomes a doorway, and once it opens, both people step closer without ever being asked. Larger groups reduce accountability. As groups grow larger, personal responsibility begins to fade. The sense of "I am responsible" slowly shifts into "someone else will handle it." This diffusion of accountability happens quietly and automatically, without conscious decision. The individual feels smaller, less visible, and less essential to the outcome. The brain calculates responsibility based on perceived impact. In a small group, each person's actions feel noticeable and consequential. In a large group, the same actions feel diluted. When many people are present, the mind assumes that effort, blame, and obligation are shared, reducing the emotional pressure to act. This reduction in accountability lowers both guilt and urgency. When responsibility feels spread thin, inaction becomes easier to justify. The emotional cost of doing nothing feels low because consequences appear unlikely to trace back to the individual. Visibility protects accountability, anonymity erodes it. Large groups also weaken social monitoring. Fewer eyes are focused on any one person, and social feedback becomes less immediate. Without clear expectations or direct responsibility, people default to passivity. The internal question shifts from "should I act?" to "why hasn't someone else acted yet?" This mechanism evolved as an efficiency shortcut, but in modern settings, it often leads to neglect. Emergencies, group projects, and moral decisions all suffer when accountability dissolves into the crowd. People are most responsible when they feel seen, needed, and essential. As numbers increase, that feeling disappears. In large groups, responsibility doesn't vanish. It spreads so thin that no one feels it strongly enough to move. Humor increases likability. When someone uses humor, they immediately lower social tension and invite emotional ease. Laughter signals safety, playfulness, and shared understanding. The brain interprets humor as a sign that a person is non-threatening and socially skilled, which makes others more comfortable in their presence almost instantly. Humor creates connection by synchronizing emotion. When people laugh together, their moods align, and that shared positive experience becomes associated with the person who initiated it. This emotional linkage happens quickly and often subconsciously. The one who made others laugh is remembered as enjoyable, warm, and approachable. Using humor also signals intelligence and confidence. It shows an ability to read the room, understand timing, and navigate social nuance. These traits increase respect and admiration, which blend naturally into likability. A well-placed joke suggests self-assurance without arrogance, making the speaker feel relatable rather than dominant. Humor also humanizes. It allows people to show imperfection, self-awareness, and vulnerability without directly exposing themselves. This softens social boundaries and reduces perceived hierarchy. When someone laughs at themselves or invites laughter, they appear more real and less guarded. Emotionally, humor provides relief. It breaks tension, diffuses conflict, and offers a momentary escape from stress. The brain remembers those who provide relief as valuable. Being around them feels lighter. This is why people gravitate toward those who make them laugh, why humor strengthens bonds, and why laughter accelerates trust. Humor does not just entertain, it leaves behind a feeling, and people tend to like whoever made them feel good. We judge others harsher than ourselves. When evaluating our own actions, we instinctively search for context. Stress, pressure, bad timing, or circumstances become explanations that soften blame. But when judging others, that same generosity disappears. Their actions are seen as reflections of who they are, not what they were dealing with. The mind shifts from understanding to evaluation without hesitation. This bias exists because self-protection is emotional. Seeing ourselves as flawed threatens identity and self-worth, so the brain shields us with excuses. For others, there is no such emotional cost. Judging them harshly feels safe because it does not endanger how we see ourselves. In fact, it often reinforces a sense of moral superiority. Emotion also shapes perception. When someone's behavior inconveniences or offends us, the emotional reaction comes first. Judgment follows to justify that feeling. We label others as careless, rude, or incompetent without considering the invisible factors shaping their behavior. With ourselves, we reverse the process, starting with explanation and ending with forgiveness. This pattern strengthens social division. Misunderstandings grow because people assume intent rather than circumstance. Small mistakes become character flaws. Empathy shrinks as certainty grows. What makes this bias powerful is how invisible it feels. Most people believe they are being fair. The mind rarely questions its own judgments, especially when they feel emotionally justified. This is why conflicts escalate quickly, why apologies feel insufficient, and why people struggle to feel understood. We grant ourselves complexity and others simplicity. In doing so, we protect our identity, but we fracture connection without realizing it. Approval activates reward systems. When a person receives approval, the brain responds as if it has been rewarded. Compliments, praise, validation, and social acceptance activate the same neural pathways associated with pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement. Approval does not just feel good emotionally, it registers as a reward at a biological level. This response is driven by dopamine, a neurotransmitter tied to learning and motivation. When approval is given, dopamine spikes, strengthening the desire to repeat whatever behavior earned that approval. The brain quietly notes, "This works," and stores it as a pattern worth repeating. Over time, approval shapes behavior more powerfully than logic or instruction. From an evolutionary perspective, approval signaled safety and belonging. Being accepted by the group meant protection and access to resources. The brain learned to treat social validation as a survival cue. Even today, a nod of agreement or a moment of praise can calm anxiety and boost confidence almost instantly. Approval also reinforces identity. When others validate us, it confirms how we see ourselves or how we want to be seen. This confirmation feels stabilizing. It reduces uncertainty and strengthens self-esteem, even if temporarily. The emotional relief that follows makes approval deeply addictive. This is why people chase likes, praise, and recognition, often without realizing it. The brain is not seeking ego, it is seeking reassurance and reward. Social approval becomes a currency, guiding choices and behavior through emotional reinforcement rather than conscious reasoning. When approval is given, the brain learns. When it is withheld, motivation drops. This invisible reward system shapes interactions, ambitions, and social dynamics in ways far more powerful than most people realize. Acknowledging opposition increases persuasion. When someone openly recognizes opposing views, resistance begins to soften. Instead of triggering defensiveness, the acknowledgement signals fairness and confidence. The listener feels seen rather than attacked, and that emotional shift creates space for openness. Persuasion becomes possible not through pressure, but through respect. This works because humans are deeply sensitive to threat. When a viewpoint is dismissed or ignored, the brain moves into protection mode. Arguments are filtered defensively, and agreement feels like surrender. Acknowledging opposition removes that threat. By communicating that disagreement is allowed, safety replaces tension, and the listener relaxes. Recognizing opposing arguments also signals credibility. It shows that the speaker has considered multiple perspectives and is not afraid of scrutiny. This confidence increases trust. People are more willing to listen to someone who appears balanced rather than biased, even if they ultimately disagree. Emotionally, acknowledgement reduces ego involvement. When people feel understood, they no longer need to fight for validation. Their identity feels less at risk, which lowers the need to resist. Once that emotional guard drops, ideas can be evaluated more honestly. Acknowledging opposition also creates contrast. By naming alternative views, the speaker frames their own position as a thoughtful choice rather than a rigid stance. This makes the argument feel reasoned instead of forced. This is why effective persuaders do not silence disagreement. They invite it, name it, and then move forward. Persuasion rarely succeeds by overpowering others. It succeeds by disarming them first. Confidence is mistaken for competence. The human brain is drawn to certainty. When someone speaks with confidence, stands with ease, and shows no visible doubt, the mind fills in the gaps with assumed ability. Confidence feels like evidence, even when none is present. Competence is inferred not from results, but from the absence of hesitation. This bias exists because uncertainty creates discomfort. Doubt signals risk, while confidence signals control. In situations where information is limited or complex, the brain takes shortcuts. It equates how sure someone appears with how capable they must be. The emotional relief of believing someone knows what they're doing often matters more than verifying the truth. Confidence also shapes perception through authority. A confident person sets the tone of the interaction. Their certainty influences how others interpret facts, frame questions, and even remember outcomes. Once confidence establishes dominance, contradiction feels socially risky. People hesitate to challenge someone who seems sure of themselves. Emotion plays a powerful role here. Confident individuals reduce anxiety in others by projecting stability. Following them feels safer than navigating uncertainty alone. This creates loyalty, trust, and deference, even when their decisions are flawed. Over time, This illusion reinforces itself. Confidence attracts attention. Attention builds influence, and influence is mistaken for expertise. Those who doubt themselves may be more thoughtful or skilled, but their hesitation hides their ability. This is why bold voices rise faster than careful ones, why errors go unnoticed when delivered with certainty, and why leadership is often assigned based on presence rather than proof. The mind does not ask who is right. It asks who seems sure. Hierarchies form naturally. Whenever humans gather, patterns of rank and influence begin to emerge. No formal rules are required. Without being assigned, people instinctively sort themselves into roles of leadership, influence, and followership. This happens quietly through behavior, confidence, competence, and social feedback rather than explicit decisions. The brain is constantly assessing who holds resources, who provides direction, and who reduces uncertainty. Individuals who appear decisive, knowledgeable, or emotionally stable are often granted higher status by the group. Others adjust their behavior around them, deferring, listening more closely, or seeking approval. Over time, these repeated interactions solidify into a hierarchy. Hierarchies reduce chaos. They help groups function by clarifying who leads, who decides, and who follows. From an evolutionary standpoint, structured groups survive better than disorganized ones. Clear status reduced conflict and made coordination easier, so the brain became comfortable with ranked social systems. Emotionally, hierarchies also provide security. Knowing one's position reduces uncertainty and social anxiety. People may resist authority intellectually, but psychologically, they often seek it. A clear structure tells the brain what is expected and how to behave. Status within a hierarchy also shapes self-worth. Higher positions bring influence and visibility, while lower positions can create stress or submission. These emotional responses are automatic, not chosen. The body reacts to rank before the mind rationalizes it. This is why hierarchies appear in workplaces, friendships, families, and even casual social groups. Humans do not need to be told who is in charge. Through subtle cues and repeated interactions, order emerges on its own. Hierarchy is not imposed. It is socially constructed and emotionally reinforced. Moral reminders improve ethics. When people are reminded of moral standards, ethical behavior increases almost immediately. The reminder does not need to be dramatic or forceful. Simply bringing values into awareness activates the part of the mind that cares about integrity, identity, and self-image. People want to see themselves as good, and moral reminders make that self-image impossible to ignore. This happens because ethical lapses often occur not from malice, but from distraction. When attention shifts toward convenience, pressure, or self-interest, moral considerations fade into the background. A reminder pulls them back into focus. It reconnects action with identity and forces the question of who one is becoming through their choices. Emotionally, moral reminders trigger accountability. They create an internal witness. Even without external judgment, people feel observed by their own standards. Violating those standards produces discomfort, guilt, or shame. Emotions the brain is motivated to avoid. Acting ethically becomes the emotionally safer option. Moral cues also reduce rationalization. When values are made explicit, it becomes harder to justify cutting corners or bending rules. The mind loses its excuses. Awareness tightens the gap between belief and behavior. These reminders can be subtle: a code of ethics, a signature, a value statement, or even recalling a personal principle can shift behavior. The power lies not in enforcement, but in reflection. This is why people behave more honestly when ethics are made visible. When morality is brought to the front of the mind, actions realign. Ethics improve not because rules are imposed, but because identity is reactivated. First impressions form instantly. The human brain makes judgments at a speed that feels almost unfair. Within seconds of seeing someone, long before a conversation begins, an impression has already taken shape. This process is automatic, emotional, and largely unconscious. The mind scans for cues of safety, confidence, warmth, and status, then locks in a narrative that feels true. This happens because the brain is designed for efficiency, not accuracy. Quick judgments once helped humans survive by identifying threats and allies without hesitation. Today, that same mechanism operates in social settings, forming opinions based on appearance, posture, facial expression, tone, and movement. Words arrive too late to stop it. Once a first impression is formed, it becomes a filter. Information that supports it is accepted easily, while contradictory details are questioned or ignored. The brain prefers consistency over correction. Changing an initial judgment requires effort, attention, and emotional openness, which most interactions never reach. Emotion plays a central role. First impressions are not logical conclusions, they are feelings. A person either feels right or off, trustworthy or uncertain. Those feelings guide behavior subtly, shaping how much we listen, how patient we are, and how much benefit of the doubt we give. This is why small details matter so much at the beginning. A pause, a smile, a tone, or a posture can tip the scale permanently. It is also why later explanations struggle to undo early perceptions. The mind decides quickly and defends that decision fiercely. First impressions do not ask for permission, and they do not wait for fairness. They arrive fully formed, then quietly shape everything that follows. Past cooperation predicts future cooperation. When someone cooperates once, the brain quietly updates its expectations about them. That single act becomes evidence of reliability. Humans are pattern detecting by nature, and cooperation is one of the strongest signals the mind uses to decide who is safe to trust in the future. Cooperative behavior reduces uncertainty. It tells the brain that this person understands mutual benefit and respects shared outcomes. Once that signal is received, future interactions feel less risky. The emotional guard lowers because past behavior suggests predictability, and predictability feels safe. Trust is not built through promises, but through memory. The brain remembers who helped, who shared, and who followed through. Each cooperative interaction reinforces a mental record that guides future decisions. Over time, cooperation becomes self-reinforcing. People are more willing to cooperate again with those who have done so before, creating upward spirals of trust and collaboration. Emotion plays a key role. Cooperation triggers positive feelings such as gratitude, relief, and connection. These emotions become associated with the person who caused them. When thinking about future interactions, the brain recalls not just the action, but how it felt. That emotional memory biases decisions toward cooperation. This mechanism evolved to protect against exploitation. Repeated cooperation identified allies, while inconsistency signaled risk. The mind learned to reward those who contributed and avoid those who did not. This is why relationships strengthen through shared effort, and why betrayal damages trust so deeply. Past cooperation becomes a shortcut for future expectation. Once someone has shown they will work with you, the brain assumes they will do so again until proven otherwise. Emotions spread socially. Emotions do not stay contained within the person who feels them. They move outward, shaping the emotional state of everyone nearby. A single person's mood can quietly influence a room, shifting tension, energy, and behavior without a word being spoken. Humans are emotionally contagious by design. This happens because the brain is constantly scanning others for emotional cues. Facial expressions, tone of voice, posture, and energy are absorbed automatically. Mirror neurons activate, allowing people to internally experience what they observe. Joy invites joy. Anxiety breeds anxiety. Calm spreads calm. The body reacts before logic has time to intervene. Social emotion sharing once served survival. Being able to feel fear when others felt fear meant faster responses to danger. That wiring still exists, even when the threats are social rather than physical. A stressed leader creates a stressed group. A relaxed presence lowers collective tension. Emotion spreads especially fast in close or high-status relationships. People are more influenced by those they care about or look up to. When someone important expresses strong emotion, others unconsciously align to maintain connection and cohesion. Emotional alignment feels like belonging. This is why workplaces absorb the mood of leadership, why crowds amplify excitement or anger, and why one person's negativity can drain a room. Emotional states ripple outward, shaping decisions and interactions. People often believe they are unaffected by others' emotions, but the influence is subtle and constant. Emotions do not require permission to spread. They move silently through social spaces, linking people together in shared feeling long before anyone realizes what has changed. Isolation harms health. Human beings are not built to be alone. When social connection disappears, the body does not interpret it as emotional discomfort, but as a threat to survival. Isolation triggers stress responses that were meant for danger, keeping the nervous system in a prolonged state of alert. Over time, this constant strain begins to wear the body down. Social isolation increases levels of stress hormones like cortisol, which weakens the immune system and disrupts sleep, digestion, and cardiovascular health. The body stays tense, as if waiting for something to go wrong. Without regular social reassurance, the brain assumes vulnerability. Loneliness becomes a biological signal, not just a feeling. Emotionally, isolation erodes regulation. Without interaction, thoughts loop inward, amplifying anxiety, sadness, and negative self-perception. Social feedback normally helps recalibrate reality. In its absence, the mind fills the silence with doubt and fear. What starts as being alone slowly turns into feeling unsafe. Isolation also reduces motivation for self-care. When no one is watching, reflecting, or responding, basic routines lose meaning. Eating well, moving the body, and resting properly feel less urgent. The body mirrors the mind's withdrawal. What makes isolation especially harmful is its invisibility. Pain is internal, gradual, and easy to dismiss until damage accumulates. The body keeps score even when the mind tries to cope. This is why strong social bonds correlate with longer life, faster recovery, and greater resilience. Connection regulates the nervous system. Without it, health quietly deteriorates, not from lack of medicine, but from lack of human presence. Vulnerability deepens bonds. When someone reveals vulnerability, they create an emotional opening that invites connection. Sharing fears, doubts, or personal struggles signals trust, and trust naturally draws people closer. The act of being open lowers defenses on both sides, transforming surface-level interaction into something more human and real. Vulnerability works because it introduces risk. By exposing something that could be judged or rejected, a person communicates authenticity. The brain interprets this as sincerity rather than performance. When someone chooses honesty over self-protection, it triggers empathy and care in others. Emotional walls soften because the interaction no longer feels guarded. This openness also encourages reciprocity. Seeing vulnerability gives others permission to reveal their own inner experiences. As this exchange deepens, emotional distance shrinks. Shared vulnerability becomes a silent agreement. We are safe to be real here. That sense of safety is the foundation of strong bonds. From a neurological perspective, vulnerability activates social bonding systems tied to trust and connection. Emotional disclosure increases oxytocin, reinforcing feelings of closeness and mutual understanding. The bond becomes anchored not in perfection, but in shared humanity. Vulnerability also reshapes perception. People feel closer to those who have shown their imperfections than to those who appear flawless. Struggle makes someone relatable. It signals depth and emotional honesty rather than weakness. This is why meaningful friendships and relationships are built through moments of openness rather than constant strength. Vulnerability turns connection into commitment. When people are seen and accepted in their unguarded moments, bonds move beyond surface interaction and become emotionally anchored. Social stories improve memory. Information becomes more memorable when it is wrapped in a social story. Facts on their own often fade, but when those same facts are tied to people, relationships, or emotional interactions, they anchor themselves in the mind. The brain is not designed to remember data in isolation. It remembers meaning, and social stories provide it. This happens because stories activate multiple areas of the brain at once. Characters, emotions, intentions, and outcomes create a mental simulation that draws the listener in. Instead of passively receiving information, the brain experiences it. That experience strengthens memory by giving the information emotional context. Social stories also trigger empathy. When people imagine others facing challenges, making choices, or experiencing consequences, they emotionally engage. Emotion acts as a highlighter for memory. The stronger the feeling, the deeper the imprint. Neutral facts are easy to forget, but emotionally charged narratives resist fading. Stories follow patterns the brain recognizes: beginning, tension, resolution. This structure makes information easier to organize and retrieve. Social dynamics add familiarity, making the story feel relevant and personal. The listener subconsciously asks how they would feel or act, further reinforcing recall. This is why lessons told through personal experiences are remembered longer than instructions, why historical events stick when framed through human lives, and why advice lands harder when it comes as a story. Memory is not just about repetition, it is about connection. When information becomes social, it becomes unforgettable. Facial expressions cross cultures. Before language, before customs, and before shared rules, the human face communicated emotion. A raised brow, a tightened jaw, widened eyes, or a genuine smile transmit meaning instantly, regardless of where someone comes from. These expressions are understood across cultures because they are rooted in biology, not learning. The brain is wired to recognize emotional signals on the face with remarkable speed. Fear, anger, joy, sadness, surprise, and disgust activate the same facial patterns in people around the world. This universality exists because interpreting emotion correctly once meant survival. Misreading a face could mean missing danger or rejecting safety. Facial expressions bypass translation. They speak directly to the emotional brain, triggering instinctive responses before conscious thought. A fearful face creates alertness. A warm smile lowers defenses. An expression of anger signals threat. These reactions happen automatically, even when cultural norms differ. Emotion spreads through faces as well. Seeing an expression often activates the same muscles in the observer, creating emotional resonance. This is why empathy can occur without words, and why emotions feel contagious in social spaces. Faces synchronize feelings before people ever agree on meaning. Cultural rules may shape how emotions are displayed or restrained, but the core signals remain the same. A smile still means friendliness. A scowl still warns of conflict. The message is recognized even if it is socially masked. This is why strangers can understand each other in silence, why tension can be felt without explanation, and why connection can spark instantly between people who share no language. The face is humanity's oldest communicator, and it still speaks fluently everywhere. Social rewards motivate strongly. Social rewards tap into some of the most powerful systems in the human brain. Praise, recognition, inclusion, and acceptance activate the same neural circuits as tangible rewards, like money or food. The brain does not treat social validation as secondary or symbolic. It treats it as real reward with real motivational force. This is because throughout human history, social rewards were tied directly to survival. Being valued by the group meant protection, access to resources, and long-term security. As a result, the brain evolved to prioritize social approval as something worth pursuing and protecting. When approval is received, dopamine is released, reinforcing the behavior that led to it and increasing the desire to repeat it. Social rewards also strengthen identity. When others acknowledge effort, competence, or belonging, it confirms that a person's actions matter. This confirmation reduces uncertainty and increases confidence, making motivation feel effortless rather than forced. People will often work harder for respect, recognition, or status than for material gain, even if they are not consciously aware of it. Emotionally, social rewards satisfy a deep need to be seen. Feeling noticed or valued signals that one's presence has impact. This creates emotional momentum. Motivation rises not from obligation, but from the desire to maintain connection and standing within the group. Social rewards are especially powerful because they are immediate and relational. A smile, a compliment, or public recognition can change behavior instantly. Unlike abstract incentives, social feedback feels personal and emotionally charged. This is why people chase likes, praise, titles, and approval, sometimes at great cost. The brain is not chasing vanity. It is responding to a reward system designed to keep us connected, valued, and driven within our social world. Uncertainty increases conformity. When people feel unsure, they instinctively look outward for guidance. Doubt weakens confidence in personal judgment, making the opinions and behaviors of others feel more reliable than one's own. In moments of uncertainty, the group becomes a compass, and aligning with it feels safer than standing alone. This response is rooted in emotional self-preservation. Uncertainty triggers anxiety, and the brain seeks relief from that discomfort as quickly as possible. Conforming offers that relief. If others agree on something, following them reduces the fear of making the wrong choice. The logic becomes simple. If many people believe or do this, it is probably correct. Uncertainty also heightens sensitivity to social cues. People watch more closely, listen more carefully, and adjust faster. Every reaction from others becomes information. The group's behavior is treated as evidence, even when it is based on the same uncertainty. This creates a loop where everyone follows everyone else, reinforcing conformity without anyone truly leading. Emotionally, uncertainty makes isolation feel dangerous. Disagreeing or standing out carries the risk of being wrong alone, which feels worse than being wrong together. Shared error feels less painful than solitary doubt. Conformity becomes an emotional shield against blame and regret. This is why people follow crowds in unfamiliar situations, why norms tighten during crises, and why new or ambiguous environments produce uniform behavior. When certainty disappears, independence weakens. In its place, conformity steps in, offering comfort, belonging, and the illusion of safety when clarity is missing. Observation improves learning. Learning does not begin with action. It begins with watching. When we observe others, the brain rehearses the behavior internally, mapping movements, decisions, and outcomes without physical effort. This silent simulation allows understanding to form before experience ever takes place. Observation activates mirror neurons, which fire as if the observer were performing the action themselves. The brain practices without risk, absorbing patterns, timing, and cause and effect relationships. This is why watching someone skilled can accelerate learning faster than trial and error alone. Mistakes are learned from without being made. Emotion strengthens this process. When an observer feels admiration, curiosity, or relevance, attention sharpens. The brain prioritizes what it sees, encoding details more deeply. Watching someone succeed creates motivation. Watching someone fail provides caution. Both outcomes become lessons. Social learning also reduces uncertainty. Seeing how others navigate a task provides a mental blueprint, making future action feel safer and more achievable. The unknown becomes familiar, and familiarity lowers resistance. The learner enters the task already oriented rather than lost. Observation is especially powerful because it feels passive, yet it is deeply active neurologically. The mind is building skill quietly beneath awareness. This is why children learn language, behavior, and emotion long before they can explain them. Watching teaches not just what to do, but how to be. Long before we act, the brain has already practiced. Learning begins the moment attention locks onto another human in motion. Good moods increase helping. When people feel good, they are more likely to help others, often without hesitation or calculation. A positive mood softens the mind and lowers internal resistance, making pro-social behavior feel natural rather than forced. Helping stops feeling like a cost and starts feeling like an extension of how the person already feels. This happens because good moods signal safety. When the brain senses that things are going well, it relaxes its defensive posture. Resources feel more abundant, time feels less threatening, and energy feels available. In that state, the mind becomes more outward focused, paying attention to others instead of guarding itself. Positive emotions also increase empathy. When someone feels happy, calm, or content, they are better able to tune into the emotions of others. Another person's need becomes more noticeable and more emotionally resonant. Helping feels rewarding because it aligns with the internal emotional state rather than disrupting it. There is also a powerful reinforcement loop at work. Helping while in a good mood often sustains or even enhances that mood. The brain learns that generosity feels good, strengthening the association between positive emotion and pro-social action. Over time, people begin to help not out of obligation, but because it supports how they want to feel. From an evolutionary perspective, good moods indicated low threat and stable conditions, making cooperation advantageous. Sharing and helping during safe periods strengthens social bonds that would later be crucial during hardship. This is why small mood boosts, like a pleasant interaction or moment of success, can dramatically increase kindness. When the mind feels light, it opens outward. Helping becomes easier because the emotional cost feels low and the emotional reward feels immediate. Roles outweigh personality. In social situations, who a person is expected to be often matters more than who they actually are. When someone steps into a role, their behavior begins to align with the expectations attached to it, even if those behaviors contradict their natural personality. The role quietly takes control, guiding actions, decisions, and emotional responses. This happens because roles come with scripts. The brain looks to those scripts to reduce uncertainty and social risk. Acting outside a role creates friction and discomfort, while following it feels safe and appropriate. Over time, the pressure to meet expectations overrides personal tendencies. A gentle person may become harsh in a position of authority. A confident person may become passive in a subordinate role. Emotionally, roles provide protection. They offer justification. When behavior is tied to a role, responsibility feels shared or externalized. People tell themselves they are just doing their job or playing their part, which softens guilt and reduces internal conflict. Identity bends to accommodate obligation. Roles also shape how others respond, which reinforces the behavior. When people treat someone as a leader, follower, expert, or outsider, the individual unconsciously adjusts to match that treatment. Feedback from the environment strengthens the role and weakens personal variation. This is why behavior changes dramatically in uniforms, titles, or hierarchies, and why people act differently at work than at home. Personality does not disappear, but it is filtered through expectation. In social systems, roles act like gravity. They pull behavior into predictable patterns, often stronger than values or traits. Who someone is matters, but who they are supposed to be often matters more. We blame character over circumstance. When something goes wrong, the human mind looks for a cause, and it often settles on personality. If someone is late, rude, or fails, we assume it reflects who they are rather than what they faced. Circumstances fade into the background, while character takes center stage. The judgment feels immediate and certain. This happens because attributing behavior to character gives the brain clarity. Situations are complex, messy, and invisible. Personality feels stable and easy to grasp. Labeling someone as careless or unreliable creates a clean explanation that requires no further thought. The mind prefers simple stories over nuanced ones. Emotion intensifies this bias. When someone's actions inconvenience or frustrate us, the emotional response comes first. Blame follows to justify the feeling. Considering circumstances would soften anger, but anger seeks certainty, not understanding. Assigning fault to character preserves the emotional reaction. For ourselves, the process reverses. We see context vividly because we lived it. Stress, pressure, and bad timing become obvious explanations. This asymmetry protects self-image while hardening judgment toward others. Over time, this pattern damages trust and empathy. Misunderstandings accumulate because people feel judged rather than understood. Small mistakes become fixed identities. Once someone is labeled, their future actions are filtered through that label. This is why conflicts escalate and why apologies often fall flat. People are not responding to the situation anymore, but to the story they've built about who someone is. When character is blamed over circumstance, complexity is lost, and connection quietly erodes. Proximity creates friendship. When people are physically close to one another over time, friendship becomes more likely, even without shared interests or deliberate effort. Proximity increases exposure, and repeated exposure breeds familiarity. The brain interprets familiar faces as safer, more predictable, and more trustworthy, laying the groundwork for connection. Each encounter, no matter how small, reduces uncertainty. Passing someone in a hallway, sitting near them, or seeing them regularly creates a sense of continuity. The mind begins to categorize the person as part of one's environment rather than as a stranger. That shift alone lowers psychological distance and resistance. Proximity also increases opportunity. Shared spaces naturally create moments for interaction, conversation, and mutual observation. These small exchanges accumulate into emotional data. The brain starts associating the other person with normalcy and comfort, even before deeper interaction occurs. Emotionally, familiarity feels reassuring. The nervous system relaxes around people who are consistently present because unpredictability fades. Over time, this ease opens the door for trust, humor, and vulnerability. Friendship often grows not from intention, but from repeated, effortless contact. From an evolutionary standpoint, bonding with those nearby made practical sense. Neighbors, tribe members, and frequent companions were the ones most likely to cooperate, share resources, and offer protection. The brain still favors closeness when forming social bonds. This is why friendships often form at work, school, or shared routines. Physical closeness quietly does the work that intention does not. By simply being near someone often enough, the mind slowly begins to care. Group identity overrides individuality. When people strongly identify with a group, their sense of self begins to merge with the collective. Personal opinions, values, and behaviors slowly shift to align with the group's identity. What once felt like My belief becomes our belief, and protecting the group starts to feel like protecting the self. This happens because belonging is emotionally powerful. Groups offer safety, meaning, and validation. When group identity is activated, the brain prioritizes cohesion over individuality. Standing apart from the group threatens connection, and that threat feels deeply personal. To avoid it, people suppress doubts, mute differences, and adopt shared norms. Group identity also simplifies the world. It divides reality into us and them, reducing complexity and uncertainty. This clarity feels comforting, especially during stress or conflict. Loyalty becomes more important than accuracy, and agreement becomes a moral signal rather than an intellectual one. Emotionally, group alignment amplifies pride and defensiveness. Success feels shared, and criticism feels like an attack on identity. People defend the group even when they privately disagree, because disagreement risks exclusion. The cost of standing alone feels higher than the cost of self-silencing. This is why people adopt group language, wear symbols, and repeat shared narratives. Over time, individuality does not disappear, but it becomes secondary. Decisions are filtered through what the group expects and values. Group identity is powerful because it rewrites who I am into who we are. Once that shift happens, the group's needs, beliefs, and emotions begin to steer behavior more strongly than personal judgment ever could. Communication increases cooperation. When people can communicate, cooperation becomes easier, faster, and more stable. The moment intentions are shared, uncertainty drops. Silence leaves space for suspicion, while communication fills that space with clarity. Even simple exchanges can transform strangers into collaborators. Communication aligns expectations. When people talk, they learn what others want, fear, and intend to do. This reduces the mental effort of guessing. The brain feels safer when outcomes are predictable, and predictability invites cooperation. People are more willing to work together when they understand the rules of the interaction. Emotion plays a central role. Being heard creates validation, and validation builds trust. When someone feels acknowledged, they are more likely to reciprocate with goodwill. Communication signals respect, and respect lowers defensiveness. Cooperation grows not from agreement, but from mutual recognition. Sharing information also reduces perceived risk. When goals, plans, and boundaries are spoken aloud, the unknown shrinks. People stop guarding themselves and start coordinating. Misunderstandings that could fracture collaboration are resolved before they take root. Communication creates accountability as well. Once intentions are expressed, actions feel socially visible. People are more likely to follow through when others are aware of their commitments. Words turn private intentions into shared responsibility. This is why dialogue outperforms assumption, why teams function better when they talk, and why conflict often dissolves once communication begins. Cooperation does not require harmony, it requires connection. When people speak and listen, working together stops feeling risky and starts feeling possible. Laughter strengthens cohesion. Laughter is a powerful social signal that instantly brings people closer together. When individuals laugh together, their emotional states synchronize, creating a shared moment of joy and release. The brain reads shared laughter as evidence of alignment, safety, and mutual understanding, reinforcing the sense of us within a group. This effect is deeply biological. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins, chemicals associated with pleasure and bonding. These chemicals reduce stress and increase feelings of trust, making social barriers dissolve. When people laugh at the same time, their bodies respond in unison, strengthening emotional connection without the need for words. Laughter also signals belonging. It shows that people share the same emotional rhythm and social cues. Understanding a joke together implies shared perspective and awareness, which deepens group identity. Those who laugh together feel more connected because they have momentarily experienced the world in the same way. Emotionally, laughter lowers defenses. It relaxes tension, softens conflict, and creates a safe space where differences feel less threatening. In groups, laughter acts as a social glue, reinforcing bonds and making individuals feel accepted and included. From an evolutionary perspective, laughter helped early humans signal safety to one another. After periods of stress or danger, it marked moments when vigilance could drop and cooperation could resume. This is why laughter is more common in social settings than alone. It is not just a reaction to humor, but a bonding mechanism. Shared laughter weaves individuals into a collective emotional experience, strengthening cohesion and making groups feel more unified and resilient. Comparison shapes self-esteem. Self-esteem rarely forms in isolation. People measure their worth by looking outward, gauging how they stand in relation to others. Achievements, appearance, intelligence, and success take on meaning only when compared. The mind uses social reference points to decide whether it is doing well or falling behind. This process is automatic and emotional. When people compare themselves to those they perceive as better off, self-esteem can shrink, replaced by inadequacy or envy. When they compare themselves to those worse off, confidence rises. These shifts happen quickly, often without conscious reflection, making self-worth feel unstable and externally controlled. Comparison once helped humans understand their place in social hierarchies, which was critical for survival. Knowing where one stood influenced access to resources, mates, and protection. That ancient mechanism still operates today, even in environments where constant comparison is unnecessary and harmful. Emotionally, comparison ties self-esteem to validation. Approval feels earned when one measures up and lost when one does not. This makes confidence fragile. A single unfavorable comparison can undo years of internal progress, while a favorable one can temporarily inflate self-worth. Modern life intensifies this effect. Constant exposure to curated successes and idealized images skews perception, making people feel behind even when they are thriving. The brain compares reality to highlights and interprets the gap as failure. This is why self-esteem fluctuates with environment, peers, and visibility. Worth becomes a moving target, shaped less by who someone is and more by who they are standing next to. Connection boosts altruism. When people feel connected, helping others becomes instinctive rather than calculated. Emotional closeness shrinks psychological distance, making another person's needs feel more immediate and personal. Their struggle no longer feels like someone else's problem. It feels relevant, almost shared. Connection activates empathy. Seeing, knowing, or relating to someone engages emotional systems that make their pain easier to feel. The brain responds not with abstract concern, but with a bodily urge to relieve discomfort. Helping becomes a way to restore emotional balance, both for them and for ourselves. This response is deeply biological. Social connection releases bonding hormones like oxytocin, which increase trust and generosity. In this state, the mind shifts from self-protection to group care. Altruism rises not because of moral reasoning, but because cooperation feels rewarding. Connection also reshapes identity. When people feel bonded, they expand their sense of self to include others. Helping no longer feels like a loss. It feels like maintaining the well-being of something you are part of. The boundary between giving and preserving blurs. Without connection, altruism weakens. Distance creates abstraction, and abstraction dulls compassion. Numbers replace faces, and urgency fades. But when connection is present, even small needs trigger action. This is why people give more to those they know, why shared experiences spark generosity, and why communities thrive on closeness. Altruism is not driven by obligation alone. It is fueled by connection, and the closer people feel, the more naturally kindness flows. Social cues guide behavior. Humans constantly look to others to decide how to act, especially in uncertain situations. Social cues like facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, and the behavior of those nearby serve as shortcuts for understanding what is appropriate, safe, or expected. The brain uses these signals to reduce ambiguity and avoid social mistakes. This guidance happens automatically. Before conscious reasoning kicks in, the mind scans the environment for clues. If others appear calm, relaxed, or approving, behavior adjusts accordingly. If tension, disapproval, or withdrawal is detected, the brain signals caution. These cues shape responses faster than logic ever could. Social cues also regulate belonging. Acting in alignment with them reduces the risk of rejection. The fear of standing out or violating unspoken rules pushes people to adapt their behavior to match the group. This adaptation often happens without awareness, driven by emotional sensitivity rather than deliberate choice. Emotion plays a central role. Humans are wired to read microsignals because social acceptance once meant survival. Missing cues could lead to exclusion, so the brain evolved to prioritize observation over assertion. As a result, people often mirror mood, energy, and behavior of those around them. Social cues are especially powerful when norms are unclear. In new environments or unfamiliar groups, people rely heavily on others to determine how to behave. The group becomes a behavioral map. This is why actions spread quickly, why silence can feel instructive, and why approval or disapproval can shift behavior instantly. Social cues quietly direct conduct, shaping decisions and actions long before conscious thought ever enters the process. Trust grows through repetition. Trust is rarely created in a single moment. It builds slowly through repeated interactions that feel consistent and predictable. Each positive encounter adds a small layer of safety, signaling that expectations will likely be met again. Over time, these layers accumulate, turning uncertainty into confidence. The brain is designed to learn through patterns. When someone behaves reliably across situations, the mind begins to relax. Vigilance decreases because the emotional cost of being cautious no longer feels necessary. Repetition replaces doubt with familiarity, and familiarity feels safe. Emotionally, repeated positive experiences reduce fear. The first interaction may be guarded, the second curious, the third comfortable. With each repetition, the nervous system calibrates, deciding that the risk of betrayal is low. Trust emerges not from promises, but from evidence quietly observed over time. Repetition also creates emotional memory. The brain remembers how it felt in past interactions and uses those feelings to predict future outcomes. If past experiences were calm, respectful, and consistent, the expectation of safety grows stronger. Inconsistency, even when intentions are good, interrupts this process and slows trust. This is why sudden closeness can feel suspicious, why reliability matters more than charm, and why broken trust is so hard to repair. One negative repetition can outweigh many positive ones because it disrupts the pattern the brain relied on. Trust is not built through intensity, explanation, or persuasion. It is built through showing up the same way again and again, allowing repetition to quietly convince the nervous system that it is safe to believe. Pressure increases risk-taking. When pressure builds, the brain shifts into survival mode. Careful thinking gives way to urgency, and long-term consequences fade behind the need for immediate relief or resolution. Under pressure, risk begins to feel like an escape rather than a threat. Doing nothing feels heavier than acting, even if the action is dangerous. This happens because pressure narrows attention. Stress hormones flood the system, limiting the brain's ability to evaluate multiple outcomes. The mind becomes focused on removing discomfort as quickly as possible. Risky choices promise speed, certainty, or control, which makes them emotionally attractive in high-pressure moments. Pressure also distorts perception. Probabilities feel smaller, and potential rewards feel larger. The brain exaggerates the upside because it is desperate for change. What would normally seem reckless begins to feel justified. Risk becomes framed as courage rather than impulsivity. Social pressure amplifies this effect. Fear of judgment, failure, or exclusion pushes people to act against their better judgment. Taking a risk can feel safer than appearing weak, indecisive, or slow. Approval becomes more valuable than caution. Emotion overrides logic in these moments. Anxiety, fear, and urgency hijack decision-making, silencing internal warning signals. The body wants resolution, not reflection. This is why people gamble under stress, make rush commitments, and take chances they later regret. Pressure does not create recklessness out of nowhere. It strips away restraint, leaving risk as the fastest path to relief. Social slights are remembered longer. Social slights leave a deeper imprint on memory than neutral or even many positive interactions. A dismissive comment, an ignored message, or a moment of exclusion can replay in the mind long after it happens. The brain treats these moments as emotionally significant because they threaten belonging, which has always been critical to survival. Negative social experiences activate strong emotional responses, such as shame, embarrassment, or hurt. Emotion acts like a highlighter for memory. The stronger the emotional charge, the more firmly the event is encoded. A social slight signals potential danger, so the brain holds on to it as information to avoid future harm. Rumination strengthens this effect. After a slight, the mind often replays the moment repeatedly, searching for meaning or mistakes. Each replay reinforces the memory, making it feel even more vivid over time. What may have been a small incident grows in emotional weight through repetition. Social slights also attack identity. They raise questions about worth, acceptance, and status. Because identity is deeply personal, anything that threatens it feels important to remember. The brain keeps these memories accessible as a way to stay alert to similar risks in the future. From an evolutionary perspective, remembering who rejected or humiliated you helped prevent repeated exclusion. The cost of forgetting was too high. As a result, the mind favors negative social memories over neutral ones. This is why compliments fade, but slights linger. The brain is not being cruel, it is being protective. It remembers social pain longer because it believes remembering is safer than forgetting. Posture affects confidence. The way the body is held sends constant signals to the brain about safety, power, and readiness. Posture is not just a reflection of confidence, it actively shapes it. When the body is upright and open, the mind begins to interpret that position as strength and control. When the body collapses inward, the mind follows, adopting caution and self-doubt. This happens because the brain relies on physical cues to assess internal state. An open chest, lifted head, and grounded stance signal dominance and stability. These signals reduce stress responses and increase a sense of capability. The nervous system interprets the posture as evidence that there is no immediate threat, allowing confidence to rise. Emotionally, posture influences how people feel about themselves. Taking up space communicates self-worth, even if it begins as a conscious adjustment. Over time, the body's position feeds back into emotion, making confidence feel more natural and less forced. The mind adjusts to match the message the body is sending. Posture also affects social feedback. Others respond more positively to confident body language, offering respect, attention, and engagement. This response reinforces the internal feeling of confidence, creating a loop where body, emotion, and social reactions strengthen each other. Slouched or closed posture sends the opposite signal. It communicates defensiveness or submission, increasing self-consciousness and anxiety. The brain prepares for judgment rather than action. This is why people feel different when they stand tall, why athletes adjust posture before performance, and why confidence can be influenced without changing a single thought. The body leads and the mind follows. Approval alters moral judgment. The desire for approval has the power to bend what people believe is right or wrong. When acceptance, praise, or belonging is on the line, moral clarity begins to blur. Actions are no longer judged solely by ethics, but by how they will be received. The brain quietly recalibrates values to protect social standing. This happens because approval is emotionally rewarding. Being accepted activates the brain's reward systems, releasing chemicals associated with pleasure and safety. Disapproval, on the other hand, triggers stress and threat responses. To avoid that discomfort, the mind becomes flexible with its principles. Approval also reshapes perception. When respected peers or authority figures endorse a behavior, it starts to feel more acceptable, even if it once conflicted with personal values. The brain interprets social validation as evidence that the action must be justified. Morality becomes social rather than internal. Emotion plays a central role. The fear of rejection can outweigh guilt, especially in group settings. Going along feels easier than standing apart. Over time, repeated compliance dulls moral sensitivity. What once felt wrong becomes normal through exposure and encouragement. This is how environments slowly rewrite ethics. People do not wake up deciding to abandon their values. They adjust incrementally, aligning with what earns approval and avoiding what threatens it. This is why good people justify harmful actions, why silence replaces protest, and why wrongdoing spreads in supportive groups. Approval does not just influence behavior, it reshapes the lens through which morality itself is seen. Respect increases honesty. When people feel respected, their need to protect themselves diminishes. Respect signals safety, value, and dignity, allowing the mind to relax its defensive barriers. In that psychological space, honesty feels less risky. The fear of judgment, punishment, or dismissal fades, making truth easier to express. Respect affirms identity. When someone feels seen as competent or worthy, they no longer feel the urge to hide flaws or distort reality to protect their image. The brain calculates that honesty will not result in social harm. Instead of managing impressions, people focus on communicating accurately. Emotionally, respect builds trust. Trust reduces anxiety, and reduced anxiety improves transparency. When individuals believe they will be listened to rather than attacked, they are more willing to share uncomfortable facts, admit mistakes, or speak openly. Respect tells the nervous system that vulnerability will not be exploited. This effect is especially powerful in power dynamics. When authority figures show respect, honesty increases dramatically. People speak more freely, offer better information, and correct errors sooner. In contrast, environments lacking respect breed silence, distortion, and concealment. The brain prioritizes self-preservation over truth when dignity feels threatened. From an evolutionary perspective, honesty was safest within supportive groups. Respect signaled inclusion, which reduced the cost of openness. That wiring still exists. People are most truthful when they feel valued rather than scrutinized. This is why respect unlocks clarity. It removes the emotional tax that dishonesty is meant to avoid. When people feel respected, truth no longer feels dangerous. It feels appropriate, safe, and worth sharing. Rituals build bonds. When people participate in rituals together, connection deepens beyond ordinary interaction. Shared rituals create moments of unity where individuals feel part of something larger than themselves. Repeated actions, symbols, or routines transform separate people into a collective with shared meaning. This happens because rituals synchronize behavior and emotion. Moving, speaking, or focusing together aligns nervous systems, creating a sense of harmony. The brain interprets this synchrony as trust and belonging. When people act in unison, emotional distance shrinks and connection feels natural rather than forced. Rituals also provide emotional safety. They are predictable, structured, and familiar, which reduces uncertainty. Knowing what comes next allows people to relax and be present with one another. That shared predictability builds comfort and reinforces the feeling of we instead of me. Emotionally, rituals mark significance. They turn ordinary moments into meaningful experiences. Celebrations, traditions, and repeated customs attach emotion to memory, making relationships feel deeper and more enduring. The bond is strengthened not just by time spent together, but by meaning shared together. Rituals also reinforce identity. Participating signals commitment and loyalty to the group. Being included in a ritual communicates acceptance, while exclusion feels emotionally painful. This strengthens attachment and motivates continued participation. This is why families, teams, cultures, and communities rely on rituals. They create connection without requiring constant conversation or explanation. Through repetition and shared meaning, rituals quietly weave individuals into bonded groups that feel stable, trusted, and emotionally real. Last speakers persuade more. What is heard last often feels strongest. When someone speaks at the end of a discussion, their message benefits from timing rather than content. The human brain gives extra weight to recent information, allowing the final voice to linger while earlier arguments fade. Memory favors what comes last. This happens because attention decreases over time. As discussions progress, mental energy drops and critical resistance weakens. By the end, people are more receptive, less analytical, and ready for closure. The last speaker arrives when the mind is most open to resolution. Emotion also plays a role. Final statements feel decisive. They carry a sense of confidence and completion, even if the ideas are not superior. Ending on a strong note creates emotional satisfaction, making agreement feel like the natural next step. The last speaker also frames interpretation. Their words become the reference point through which previous arguments are reevaluated. What was once compelling can be subtly redefined or dismissed by a well-timed closing perspective. Control over the ending becomes control over meaning. This effect is amplified in group settings. People look to the final voice for cues on what conclusion to draw. Silence that follows feels like consent, reinforcing the persuasiveness of the last message. This is why closing arguments matter, why final impressions endure, and why timing can outweigh logic. Persuasion is not only about what is said, but when it is said. The last voice does not just end the conversation. It shapes how the conversation is remembered. Rejection fuels aggression or withdrawal. Rejection triggers a powerful threat response in the brain, and the body reacts by preparing to protect itself. When someone is excluded or dismissed, the nervous system shifts into survival mode. From that state, behavior tends to move in one of two directions: outward aggression or inward withdrawal. Aggression emerges when the brain interprets rejection as an attack. Anger becomes a shield, pushing others away before they can hurt again. This response restores a sense of control and power, even if it damages relationships. Lashing out can temporarily numb the pain of exclusion by replacing vulnerability with dominance. Withdrawal, on the other hand, is a defensive retreat. When rejection feels overwhelming or repeated, the brain chooses invisibility over risk. Pulling back reduces exposure to further social pain. Silence, isolation, and emotional numbness become strategies to avoid being hurt again. Both reactions are driven by the same core fear: loss of belonging. Rejection threatens identity and safety, so the mind responds with extremes. Calm, balanced responses are difficult because the emotional pain hijacks rational processing. The brain is not choosing between aggression or withdrawal consciously. It is reacting to perceived danger. From an evolutionary standpoint, both responses once had value. Aggression could deter future exclusion, while withdrawal could conserve energy and prevent further harm. That ancient wiring remains active today. This is why rejection can change behavior so quickly and so intensely. The pain demands a response. Whether it turns outward or inward depends on personality, context, and past experience, but the driving force is the same: the brain's urgent need to protect itself from social loss. Belonging is a core human need. Humans are not built to exist in isolation. The need to belong is as fundamental as the need for food or safety. Connection signals survival, while exclusion signals danger. Long before conscious thought, the brain monitors whether it is accepted, valued, or at risk of being pushed out. This need is rooted in evolution. For early humans, belonging to a group meant protection, shared resources, and survival. Being excluded meant vulnerability and death. That ancient logic still lives in the nervous system today. Social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain because, historically, it carried the same threat. Emotionally, belonging provides stability and meaning. It reassures people that they matter and that their existence is recognized by others. When people feel they belong, anxiety decreases, confidence rises, and resilience strengthens. When belonging is threatened, fear, shame, and self-doubt quickly emerge. Belonging also shapes behavior. People change how they speak, act, and even think to maintain connection. The fear of exclusion can override logic and values, pushing individuals to conform or stay silent to protect their place in the group. Acceptance becomes more important than authenticity. This is why loneliness feels so heavy, why rejection lingers, and why people endure unhealthy relationships rather than be alone. The pain of disconnection cuts deep because it strikes at a primal need. Belonging is not a luxury or a preference. It is a psychological necessity that quietly drives decisions, emotions, and identity. To belong is to feel safe, seen, and human. Friends shape opinions. Opinions rarely form in isolation. They are molded quietly through repeated exposure to the beliefs of those we trust. Friends influence how we see the world because their views feel safe, familiar, and emotionally aligned with our identity. Agreement strengthens belonging, while disagreement introduces friction into relationships we want to preserve. This influence works through repetition and normalization. Hearing the same perspective from friends makes it feel reasonable, then obvious, then true. The brain interprets consensus within a close circle as evidence, even when broader perspectives exist. What friends believe becomes the baseline for what feels normal. Emotion deepens this effect. Accepting a friend's opinion feels rewarding because it reinforces connection. Challenging it risks tension, misunderstanding, or distance. To avoid that discomfort, the mind subtly adjusts its stance, often without conscious awareness. Over time, opinions shift, not through debate, but through emotional alignment. Friends also shape interpretation. They influence which information feels credible, which sources are trusted, and which viewpoints are dismissed. Facts are filtered through social context. Agreement signals intelligence and loyalty. Disagreement can feel like betrayal. This is why beliefs cluster in social groups, why polarization grows, and why people are surprised to discover how much their views resemble those around them. Friends do not need to persuade aggressively. Their influence is quiet, constant, and relational. Opinions feel personal, but they are social at their core. Long before people think independently, they think together, shaped by the voices they hear most and the bonds they value most. Attractiveness is socially influenced. Attractiveness is not judged in isolation. What people find appealing is shaped by social cues, context, and the reactions of others. When someone is desired, admired, or valued by a group, their perceived attractiveness increases. The brain uses social validation as evidence, assuming that if others see value, there must be something worth noticing. This happens because humans rely on social proof to reduce uncertainty. Attraction involves risk, and the mind looks for reassurance before investing emotionally. Seeing others show interest signals safety and desirability. It suggests that choosing this person is socially approved and unlikely to lead to rejection or regret. Emotionally, attractiveness is tied to status. People who are respected, confident, or influential are often seen as more attractive, even if their physical features remain unchanged. The brain blends social value with physical perception, upgrading attractiveness based on how someone is treated and regarded. Context also plays a powerful role. A person may appear more attractive in a setting where they are confident, admired, or in control. Group reactions, laughter, and attention subtly reshape perception. Attraction increases not because the person changed, but because the environment reframed them. This is why popularity amplifies desirability, why people seem more attractive when surrounded by admirers, and why attraction shifts over time and culture. Beauty is not fixed. It is filtered through social influence. Attractiveness grows where approval, confidence, and validation exist. The eyes may look, but the brain decides, and it rarely decides alone. Shared goals unite strangers. When people focus on the same objective, social distance collapses rapidly. A shared goal gives strangers a reason to align, cooperate, and trust one another without needing history or familiarity. The brain shifts from "who are you" to "we are working toward the same outcome," and that shift changes everything. Shared goals reduce uncertainty. They provide structure, direction, and a common purpose that replaces personal differences with collective focus. When individuals know what they are working toward together, behavior becomes predictable and coordinated. Predictability creates safety, and safety accelerates bonding. Emotionally, shared goals generate a sense of we. Success and failure become collective experiences rather than individual ones. This emotional merging strengthens connection because outcomes are felt together. Effort feels meaningful when it contributes to something larger than oneself, especially when others are visibly invested in the same result. Shared goals also reframe identity. Strangers stop being outsiders and start being teammates. The brain categorizes people by role rather than background, reducing bias and increasing cooperation. Trust forms not from liking, but from shared commitment. From an evolutionary perspective, cooperation toward common goals improves survival. Hunting, building, and defending required coordination among individuals who may not have had prior bonds. The brain learned to prioritize unity when objectives aligned. This is why teams form quickly under pressure, why movements bond people overnight, and why collaboration can override difference. Shared goals give strangers a reason to connect, act, and trust before familiarity ever has time to grow. Gratitude increases helping. When gratitude is expressed, it activates a powerful social loop that encourages future helping. Being thanked does more than acknowledge an action. It signals that the effort mattered. The brain registers gratitude as social reward, reinforcing the desire to help again. Gratitude affirms value. When someone expresses appreciation, it confirms that the helper is seen, useful, and positively impactful. This validation strengthens self-worth and increases motivation to maintain that identity. Helping becomes part of how the person sees themselves, not just something they did once. Emotionally, gratitude creates warmth and connection. It transforms a transactional act into a relational one. The helper feels emotionally closer to the person who expressed thanks, making future assistance feel natural rather than obligatory. This emotional bond lowers resistance to helping again. Gratitude also reduces uncertainty. When appreciation is expressed, the brain no longer questions whether the effort was noticed or wasted. That clarity removes doubt and increases confidence in acting prosocially. People are more likely to help when they believe their actions will be valued rather than ignored. From an evolutionary perspective, gratitude strengthened cooperation within groups. It marked reliable partners and reinforced mutual support. Those who felt appreciated were more likely to invest again in the relationship. This is why simple expressions of thanks can dramatically change behavior. Gratitude turns helping into a rewarding experience rather than a sacrifice. When people feel genuinely appreciated, generosity stops feeling costly and starts feeling emotionally fulfilling, encouraging a cycle of continued support. Behavior spreads socially. Human behavior does not stay confined to the individual. Actions ripple outward, influencing others who observe them. When people see a behavior repeated, rewarded, or normalized, they become more likely to adopt it themselves. This spread happens quietly, often without intention or awareness. The brain is built to learn socially. Observing others provides shortcuts to understanding what is acceptable, effective, or safe. Instead of testing everything personally, people copy what they see working for others. This conserves energy and reduces risk. If many people behave a certain way, the brain assumes there is a good reason. Emotion plays a central role. Behaviors tied to positive outcomes, approval, or belonging spread fastest. When someone is rewarded socially for an action, others feel an emotional pull to imitate it. The desire for acceptance turns observation into action. Behaviors also spread through repetition and proximity. The more often people see something, the more normal it feels. Over time, unfamiliar actions lose their strangeness and become default. What once felt odd begins to feel expected. This is why habits form within groups, why workplace cultures shape conduct, and why trends emerge without planning. One person sets a tone, others absorb it, and soon the behavior feels collective. People often believe their actions are purely personal choices, but social environments constantly shape them. Behavior spreads not through instruction, but through exposure. What surrounds people quietly teaches them how to act, and over time, those lessons become invisible but powerful. Observation changes behavior. The moment people know they are being watched, behavior shifts. Actions become more controlled, more socially acceptable, and more aligned with expectations. Observation activates self-awareness, turning automatic habits into monitored performances. Even without feedback, the presence of an observer changes how the mind operates. This happens because being watched triggers evaluation. The brain begins anticipating judgment, praise, or criticism, and adjusts behavior to manage outcomes. Reputation becomes emotionally relevant. People act not just to achieve a goal, but to protect how they are perceived. Observation increases restraint and effort. Mistakes feel riskier, while successes feel more rewarding. This heightened emotional state sharpens focus and alters decision-making. People may work harder, behave more generously, or follow rules more strictly when eyes are on them. At the same time, observation can suppress authenticity. Fear of judgment leads to conformity, caution, and self-censorship. Individuals choose safer behaviors over honest ones, especially in social or hierarchical settings. The desire to appear competent outweighs the freedom to experiment. Even imagined observation has power. Cameras, mirrors, or the belief that one is being monitored can produce the same effect. The brain does not require proof. The possibility is enough. This is why public settings influence conduct, why anonymity changes behavior, and why people act differently when alone. Being observed does not just reveal behavior, it reshapes it in real time, quietly guiding actions through awareness and emotional pressure. People overestimate agreement. People tend to believe that others share their opinions far more than they actually do. When someone holds a belief, preference, or judgment, the mind quietly assumes it is common sense. Disagreement feels rare, unexpected, or even irrational, not because it is, but because the brain uses its own perspective as the default reference point. This happens because humans experience the world from inside their own thoughts. Personal beliefs feel obvious and well supported, so the mind projects them outward onto others. This projection creates a false sense of consensus, making one's views feel more widely accepted than they truly are. Emotion plays a powerful role in this distortion. Agreement feels comforting. It reassures the brain that one is aligned with the group and safely within social norms. Assuming others agree reduces uncertainty and anxiety. Questioning whether one is alone in a belief feels emotionally threatening, so the brain avoids it by default. Social environments reinforce this illusion. People often surround themselves with like-minded individuals or consume information that confirms their views. Silence or politeness from others is easily misread as agreement, even when it is not. The absence of open disagreement becomes proof that consensus exists. Overestimating agreement also protects identity. If others disagree, it challenges not just opinions but self-image. To avoid that discomfort, the mind leans toward the belief that disagreement is minimal or fringe. This is why people are often shocked by opposing views, confused by backlash, or blindsided by conflict. The brain mistakes familiarity for universality. What feels obvious internally is not nearly as shared externally as it seems. Validation boosts short-term confidence. When someone receives validation, confidence rises almost immediately. Being seen, praised, or agreed with signals acceptance, and that emotional reassurance quiets self-doubt. For a moment, the inner questioning stops, replaced by the feeling of being enough. This effect is driven by the brain's reward system. Validation releases dopamine, creating a sense of relief and pleasure. The mind interprets approval as proof that one's thoughts, actions, or identity are correct. Confidence grows not from internal certainty, but from external confirmation. Emotionally, validation soothes insecurity. It reassures people that they are aligned with social expectations and that they belong. This comfort can be powerful, especially when self-esteem is fragile. The fear of rejection fades, allowing people to speak, act, or take risks more freely. However, the boost is temporary. Because the confidence comes from outside, it fades once the validation disappears. Without continued reinforcement, doubt often returns. The mind begins to seek the next signal of approval to restore the feeling. This creates a cycle. People may unconsciously chase validation to maintain confidence, adjusting behavior to earn praise rather than acting from internal values. Confidence becomes reactive instead of stable. This is why compliments can feel energizing, likes and approval feel addictive, and criticism can deflate confidence quickly. Validation works fast, but briefly. It lifts confidence in the moment, while quietly teaching the mind to depend on others to feel secure. Groups shape morals. Moral beliefs do not develop in isolation. They are shaped, reinforced, and adjusted within groups. What feels right or wrong often depends less on internal conviction and more on the values modeled and rewarded by the people around us. Belonging quietly becomes a moral compass. This happens because morality is deeply social. Groups define acceptable behavior through approval, punishment, praise, and silence. When certain actions are normalized, they stop triggering internal conflict. When others are condemned, they begin to feel wrong even without personal reflection. The group provides emotional feedback that trains moral judgment. Emotion plays a powerful role. Acting in line with group morals brings safety and acceptance. Violating them risks rejection and shame. The brain prioritizes these emotional consequences, sometimes above abstract ethical reasoning. Over time, moral discomfort fades when behavior is socially reinforced. Groups also frame interpretation. The same action can be seen as honorable or immoral depending on collective values. Once a group narrative is established, individuals adopt it to maintain coherence and identity. Morality becomes a shared story rather than a personal rulebook. This is how people justify actions they once questioned, why environments can normalize harm, and why moral courage feels costly. Few people abandon values all at once. They adapt gradually, guided by what their group accepts. Morals feel deeply personal, but they are socially maintained. The strongest influence on what people believe is right is not reason alone, but the group they belong to and the approval they depend on. Individuals evoke more empathy than crowds. The human brain responds more strongly to a single person than to a large group. When faced with an individual, emotions activate quickly and vividly. A face, a name, or a personal story gives the mind something concrete to connect to. In contrast, crowds feel abstract, distant, and emotionally diluted. Empathy depends on imagination. It requires the brain to simulate another person's experience. This is far easier with one identifiable individual than with many. When numbers grow, emotional clarity shrinks. Suffering becomes statistical rather than personal, and the brain struggles to attach feeling to scale. Emotionally, a single person feels real. Their pain can be visualized, their fear imagined, their story remembered. A crowd lacks that intimacy. The mind cannot fully grasp mass suffering, so it protects itself by disengaging. This is not a lack of compassion, but a cognitive limit. This response evolved as a survival mechanism. Early humans lived in small groups where individual relationships mattered. The brain developed to care deeply about known or visible individuals, not large, impersonal populations. That wiring remains unchanged in a world of massive numbers. Crowds also diffuse responsibility. When many people are affected, the mind assumes someone else will help. With an individual, responsibility feels clearer and more personal, increasing emotional involvement. This is why single stories move people more than statistics, and why faces inspire action more than numbers. The brain is built for empathy at a human scale. One person can break the heart. A crowd overwhelms it. Bonds increase stress resilience. Strong social bonds change the way the body and mind respond to stress. When people feel connected and supported, challenges feel more manageable and less overwhelming. Stress does not disappear, but it loses its intensity. The presence of trusted others acts as a psychological buffer against pressure. This happens because connection signals safety to the nervous system. Knowing that support is available reduces the brain's threat response. Stress hormones are regulated more effectively, allowing the body to recover faster after difficult moments. The mind feels less alone in facing adversity, which softens fear. Emotionally, bonds provide reassurance. Being understood, listened to, or simply accompanied reminds people that they do not have to handle everything on their own. This sense of shared burden increases emotional strength and endurance. Pain feels lighter when it is not carried in isolation. Social bonds also encourage healthier coping. Supportive relationships offer perspective, encouragement, and grounding. They help people reinterpret challenges, turning chaos into something survivable. Even silent presence can restore stability. This is why people with strong relationships recover faster from trauma, illness, and loss. Loneliness, by contrast, amplifies stress, making problems feel heavier and more threatening than they are. Bonds do not remove hardship, but they change how it is experienced. Connection transforms stress from a breaking force into a manageable one, proving that resilience is not just an individual trait, but a shared one. Public settings increase conformity. When behavior becomes visible, individuality quietly retreats. In public settings, people become more aware of being evaluated, watched, and judged. This awareness activates a powerful need to fit in. Standing out feels risky, while blending in feels safe. Conformity becomes a form of self-protection. Public visibility increases social pressure. The brain anticipates reactions before they happen, imagining approval or embarrassment. To avoid negative attention, people adjust their behavior to match what seems normal in that environment. Even personal beliefs can be temporarily suppressed to maintain social harmony. Emotion drives this process. Shame, fear of ridicule, and fear of exclusion carry more emotional weight in public than in private. The discomfort of being seen as different often outweighs the discomfort of ignoring one's own preferences. Alignment feels easier than resistance. Public settings also amplify social cues. People look to others for guidance on how to act. Once a pattern is established, deviation feels more noticeable. The group becomes a silent authority, shaping behavior without speaking. This is why people agree publicly and disagree privately, why crowds move in unison, and why individuals act differently when alone. Public environments reward sameness and penalize difference, even subtly. Conformity in public is not about lacking conviction. It is about managing exposure. When actions are visible, safety is found in similarity, and people choose acceptance over authenticity without ever consciously deciding to do so. Fairness increases cooperation. When people perceive a situation as fair, their willingness to cooperate rises sharply. Fairness signals balance, respect, and predictability, allowing the brain to relax its guard. In fair environments, cooperation feels safe because the risk of exploitation feels low. Fairness reduces suspicion. When rules are clear and outcomes feel just, people stop scanning for hidden threats or advantages. The mind no longer needs to protect against being taken advantage of. That psychological safety frees energy for collaboration rather than defense. Emotionally, fairness validates dignity. Being treated fairly confirms that one's effort, time, and presence matter. This affirmation strengthens trust and encourages reciprocal behavior. People are far more willing to contribute when they believe others are playing by the same rules. Fairness also stabilizes expectations. When outcomes align with effort, behavior becomes predictable. Predictability builds trust, and trust fuels cooperation. People commit more fully when they believe the system will not betray them. From an evolutionary perspective, fairness helped maintain group stability. Groups that punished cheating and rewarded contribution survive longer. The brain learned to associate fairness with long-term benefit and unfairness with danger. Unfairness, by contrast, triggers anger and withdrawal. It activates threat responses that shut down cooperation. Even small perceived injustices can undo collective effort because they signal risk. This is why fairness matters more than generosity. People will tolerate scarcity and effort if they believe the process is just. Fairness tells the brain it is safe to invest. Once that belief exists, cooperation follows naturally. Social bonding releases oxytocin. When people connect through trust, touch, or emotional closeness, the brain releases oxytocin, a hormone deeply tied to bonding and safety. This chemical response is not accidental. It is the body's way of reinforcing connection by making it feel good, calm, and secure. The moment bonding occurs, the nervous system shifts out of defense and into trust. Oxytocin lowers stress and softens fear. It reduces cortisol levels, slows the heart rate, and creates a sense of emotional warmth. This makes closeness feel soothing rather than risky. The brain learns to associate certain people with safety, which strengthens attachment and loyalty over time. Emotionally, oxytocin deepens trust. It makes others feel more familiar, more likable, and more worthy of care. This is why physical affection, eye contact, shared vulnerability, and supportive presence feel powerful. They are not just gestures, they trigger chemistry that binds people together. Oxytocin also increases empathy. It heightens sensitivity to others' emotions, making people more responsive and compassionate. This emotional attunement strengthens relationships and encourages cooperation, creating a cycle where connection fuels more connection. This chemical response explains why bonds feel addictive, why separation hurts, and why closeness feels stabilizing. The body rewards connection because connection once ensured survival. Social bonding is not only psychological, it is biological. Oxytocin turns moments of trust into lasting attachment, teaching the body who feels safe to stay close to and why letting go can feel so hard. Familiarity increases liking. The more often people encounter something, the more comfortable it feels. Familiarity reduces uncertainty, and the brain interprets reduced uncertainty as safety. What feels safe begins to feel pleasant, and what feels pleasant is often mistaken for liking. Repetition quietly turns neutrality into preference. This happens because the brain is designed to conserve energy. Familiar people, faces, and ideas require less mental effort to process. Ease is emotionally rewarding. The mind relaxes around what it recognizes, lowering defenses and increasing openness. Comfort becomes the foundation of attraction. Familiarity also builds trust. Repeated exposure signals reliability. If something appears again and again without causing harm, the brain concludes it must be safe. This judgment happens automatically, without conscious evaluation of quality or value. Emotion strengthens this effect. Familiarity reduces anxiety and creates predictability, both of which feel good. Over time, that positive emotional state becomes associated with the person or object itself. Liking emerges not from excitement, but from comfort. This is why friendships grow through proximity, why repeated exposure increases attraction, and why people favor what they recognize over what is new. Even ideas become more appealing simply because they are heard often. Familiarity does not guarantee deep affection, but it opens the door. The brain prefers what it knows, not because it is better, but because it feels safe. In a world full of uncertainty, comfort is persuasive. Expectations shape actions. What people expect often becomes what they do. Expectations act like invisible instructions that guide behavior before conscious decisions are made. When the mind anticipates a certain outcome, it subtly adjusts actions, attention, and effort to align with that belief. This happens because expectations shape perception. The brain looks for information that confirms what it already believes. When success is expected, obstacles feel manageable and effort feels worthwhile. When failure is expected, the same obstacles feel heavier and motivation drops. The environment does not change, but behavior does. Emotionally, expectations influence confidence. Positive expectations increase self-belief, reducing anxiety and hesitation. Negative expectations heighten doubt and self-protection. People unconsciously act in ways that confirm their emotional predictions, creating self-fulfilling patterns. Expectations also affect how others respond. When someone is treated as capable, trustworthy, or competent, they are more likely to behave that way. Conversely, low expectations communicate doubt, which people often internalize. Behavior shifts to match the role they believe they are seen as playing. From an evolutionary standpoint, expectations help prepare for future outcomes. Anticipation allowed the brain to allocate energy efficiently. That same mechanism now shapes social behavior, performance, and relationships. This is why belief can be as powerful as reality. Expectations quietly steer choices, effort, and persistence. People rarely act purely on ability or circumstance. They act on what they think will happen, and those thoughts shape the actions that make it happen. Smaller groups increase responsibility. When groups become smaller, individual responsibility becomes impossible to avoid. Each person feels more visible, more accountable, and more essential to the outcome. The psychological cover of anonymity disappears, and with it, the comfort of assuming someone else will step in. This happens because the brain tracks responsibility based on numbers. In large groups, duty feels diluted. The mind spreads obligation across many people, reducing the emotional pressure to act. In smaller groups, that diffusion collapses. Each person's role feels clearer, and the cost of inaction feels personal. Emotionally, visibility increases self-awareness. When fewer people are present, actions and failures are easier to trace. People imagine how they will be judged if they do nothing, and that imagined judgment creates urgency. Helping, contributing, or taking charge becomes a way to protect self-image and social standing. Smaller groups also increase perceived impact. When someone believes their actions matter, motivation rises. Effort feels meaningful rather than symbolic. This sense of impact strengthens commitment and follow-through, turning passive members into active participants. Responsibility in small groups is reinforced by social connection. People care more about letting down those they know personally. Emotional bonds amplify accountability, making neglect feel like betrayal rather than neutrality. This is why teamwork improves in small units, why bystanders act more when alone, and why leadership emerges faster in tight circles. As group size shrinks, responsibility sharpens. What was once shared becomes personal, and action becomes harder to avoid.